Something really creepy happened a few months ago when I was on a road trip. I found myself driving really late at night because I was trying to find a hotel. I had stopped at a gas station, but I had no service, so I started driving to hopefully get service in the next town. However, I must have really been in a dead zone because as I continued driving, I just didn't have any service. After driving for like 20 more minutes, I took the next exit to try to find a gas station again. I still didn't have service, and at that point, I was just going to buy a map or see if the worker at the gas station knew of any nearby hotels. So after taking the exit, I did not immediately see any gas stations or anything really. I kept driving and then took another road, hoping that it would be more promising, but it wasn't. This road appeared very quiet, and very shortly after turning onto it, I noticed something strange. There appeared to be two men just sort of standing in the middle of the road. This was confusing. They did not appear to be construction workers right off the bat because they weren't wearing reflective vests or anything, and they also did not appear to be police. As I got closer, I saw that they were just wearing regular clothes. However, they both looked right at me as I approached them. I thought they might move off to the side of the road or something. Nothing appeared wrong with the street, and this was not a road that had a sidewalk on it or anything. There was woods on both sides, and it didn't seem like anybody would be out walking around there. The men stood there in the middle of the street, blocking me from passing. I came to a complete stop, and I had a bad feeling about it. I decided that it would be best to just leave, but before I did, I saw that the men were walking towards me. I lowered my driver's window a little and asked what was going on, but they didn't answer me. They just continued approaching. One of them was going towards each side of my car. I then hit reverse and started slowly backing up. One of the men went faster towards me, and I saw the other guy going to the side of the road. At that point, I turned to try to turn my car around so that I could drive the opposite way. I was far enough from the men that I didn't think they would catch me in the small amount of time that I would be stopped. So I went slightly off the road, stopped, put my car into drive, and then I started going the opposite way. By now, one of the men had gotten within 30 feet of my car, and the other was a short distance behind that. But the second man was now holding something large. I hit the gas, not knowing what it was, and started to drive away from there. In my mirror, as I was driving off, I saw the man go down and slide the object. Whatever it was slid pretty fast, and it almost reached my car, but it went off the road right behind me. That's when I realized it was probably a spike strip, the stuff that police use to pop a suspect's tires in a chase. So these guys were trying to pop my tires, but I knew that these men were not police. I kept driving away, and I got onto the next road which led to the highway. Then I tried calling the police, but I still had no service. I got back to the highway and drove down for a little while. About 15 minutes later, I finally had service again. Then I called the police. I told them about it, and they said they would go over and look into it. The men were probably gone by then though, and I never heard anything more about it. I was able to get to a hotel that night, and then continue with my road trip. This is something that still freaks me out to this day when I think about it. I'm not sure if those guys were trying to rob me or what, but I'm just really glad that I got away from them. One night in the middle of nowhere, I had a freaky situation happen to me. I was visiting my grandma, who lived out in the middle of nowhere. She had a house on the lake, and to get there required driving down a long dirt road for many miles. It wasn't a very popular lake, so she didn't have any neighbors, the closest houses being at least a mile or two away. Because it was such a long drive, whenever I visited, I would just naturally stay the night in her guest bedroom so that I wouldn't have to drive long, tiring hours in the darkness. One night when I was visiting my grandma, I was sitting out on her back patio just hanging out listening to music. It was close to midnight, and my grandma had gone to bed already, so I was just enjoying the nice night air while sitting outside on my phone. Over the sound of my music, I thought I heard something banging or clanking around. There was a steady breeze that night, so I just expected it to be the wind moving something and making noise down by the boathouse. However, as the night continued, I also saw some quick flashes of light from down by the dock and the boathouse, and I knew that somebody had to be messing around down there. I was nervous because I was out in the middle of nowhere and isolated enough that there shouldn't be anybody nearby, let alone looking around down by my grandma's boathouse. I thought about calling the cops, but decided against it because it would take over an hour for them to arrive most likely. Instead, I turned off the music and went inside to grab my grandma's revolver, which I knew she kept loaded. Upon coming back outside the patio, I saw occasional movements of light down by the boathouse, so I decided to confront whoever it was now that I had a weapon. I called out to stop messing around by the dock and to reveal themselves and leave the property. I assumed that whoever it was would simply just leave without revealing who they were, but to my surprise, the figure of a tall, skinny man stepped out onto the dock. Illuminated by the moonlight, all I could see was his figure at first, but as he approached, I saw that it was an older gentleman. He casually began walking up the dock and towards where I was standing on the back patio, as if he had been doing nothing wrong. He didn't say anything as he slowly kept approaching, so I yelled out to stop and leave the property or else I'd shoot. I thought for sure that would be enough warning for him, but he just kept coming up the lawn towards me. I finally took a warning shot right above his head to stop him from advancing. After I had fired the shot, he put up his hands and spoke to me for the first time, saying to take it easy and relax. Fully creeped out by the demeanor of this old skinny man, I told him to leave immediately or I would shoot him. The man stood still for a couple seconds, and I thought that he might start walking towards me again and I'd have to shoot him. However, he turned back and walked out into the woods, back down to the left of the dock, and disappeared. I was worried the rest of the night and didn't get much sleep, half expecting him to come back, but he never did. I'm not sure what his deal was and why he was so comfortable and nonchalant about approaching me while at gunpoint. The following morning, I warned my grandma about it, just in case he ever came around again. This happened to me 2 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I live in the countryside of Ireland, far from the nearest town, out in the middle of nowhere. It's usually pretty quiet, which is nice. Most nights, the only sounds I hear are the occasional cow escaping the field next door or my dog barking at someone walking by. But about 2 years ago, I heard something really strange. It was late spring, and the night sky was clear. I remember stepping into the kitchen around midnight for a snack. As I rummaged through the cupboards, I began to hear noises outside. At first, I thought it was just an animal, but the sounds only grew louder. I opened up the window to listen better, and I saw my dog standing by the back door. She wasn't barking, which was strange because she usually barks at anything, especially animals. Instead, she was focused on the forest behind our house. The noise was hard to describe, but it was like metal being scraped, but it had a croaky quality to it. I didn't like it, and the fact that my dog was scared made me uneasy, because she was a big dog and not easily frightened. I couldn't understand what could be out there, so I decided to bring her inside and go to bed. But as I lay in my room, the sound seemed to follow me. It shifted to the front of the house, which didn't make sense. I shut my curtains, hoping to block out whatever was outside. Just as I got comfortable, I heard a tap on my window. It was soft at first, but then it became a steady tapping noise. It sounded like stones being thrown against the glass. I stayed under the covers, just listening and hoping that it would stop. It went on for what felt like an eternity, but eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, I mentioned the night to my neighbors. That's when I found out a man had moved into a house just around the corner. They said he wasn't exactly a law-abiding citizen, and he had a history of trouble with the law, so much so that whispers about him being a drug dealer floated around. About a month later, a massive stash of drugs was discovered in a shed nearby, and we never saw that man again after that. Thinking back, I can't shake the feeling that he might have been trying to scare me that night while he was high or something, but it was just all so strange. Like, how did he create that sound for hours, and how did the sound move around the outside of my house so quickly? What unsettled me the most was the thought of what could have happened if I had gone to check on the noise. I'm still not 100% sure of what it was, but it freaked me out.
A long time ago, my job had an office near the Canadian border in Washington state. I often had to travel up there to help train staff. Being a bachelor in my late 20s and liked getting away for a few days, I was always up to making some extra cash by volunteering to go whenever help was needed up there. I would usually fly up there, but there were a few occasions where I would have to bring some equipment with me and would drive. This one particular time was about 17 years ago. We had bought a bunch of equipment wholesale and would have to be delivered, along with some other odds and ends, to our office in upstate Washington. Of course, everyone knew that I would volunteer for the drive. I would be driving a box truck up there and would have to fly back. Prior to this, I would always drive a company car or an SUV, but I wasn't too worried. The box truck wasn't that big. I always preferred to start my journey toward the end of the day because I'm one of those people who like driving at night. For the majority of my drive, it was uneventful. I only stopped at gas stations and the occasional rest stop whenever nature called. At some point near the California-Oregon border is when things started to get strange. It was approximately 1 o'clock in the morning. I had to stop at a rest area. It was probably the last one on the California side. In the far distance, I do remember seeing some truckers parked, but basically, the rest of the parking lot was empty. Now at this point, I wasn't really thinking anything was creepy or out of the ordinary. I get out of my truck and go to the restroom to take care of business. I took my time because I wanted to stretch my legs a bit. Once I made my exit and began walking back over to my truck, I noticed that there's a vehicle parked next to mine. This entire parking lot was open, and this person pulls up right next to me. I thought it was odd, but I brushed it off and jumped back into the truck to continue my journey. About 10 or 12 miles down the freeway, my truck begins to act funny. The interior lights begin flickering. A little while later, all the lights in the vehicle go out. The interior lights, the taillights, and the headlights. At this point, it's about 2 a.m., and I'm driving through a forested area in southern Oregon. I was more angry than scared at that point, driving 60 miles an hour in the middle of what seemed to be like a scene out of Tales from the Dark Side. I pound my fist on the dashboard and scream at the truck. Almost instantly, everything came back on. At the next rest stop, I decided to pull over again. All the adrenaline made me had to take another piss. I jumped out of my truck and went to the restroom, although this time I didn't take as long inside. When I came back out, I remember thinking that I should stay there until dawn. As I approach my truck again, I see an older guy, somewhat heavy-set, gray hair. He was standing next to my truck. I didn't see a vehicle near mine, but I just assumed that he was out stretching his legs. As I get closer, he starts up a conversation, saying something about the weather. A very light snow was falling, but not the kind of stuff that stays on the ground. I wasn't really paying much attention to him, because my first impression was he was just a lonely old guy who wanted to chat, and I really wasn't in the mood. He then said something that made my hairs stand up. As he was looking at my truck, he says, "Are you having some mechanical problems?" I stopped in my tracks, and I felt all the blood rushing to my head. I just said, No, it's working fine. I just stopped here to use the restroom." "Oh, well, I don't live too far from here. You're more than welcome to join me for a hot cup of coffee, or maybe you want to rest on the couch for a while." This guy had no idea who I was, and he was inviting me into his home. This kinda gave me the creeps, but I kept it to myself. So I basically ended the conversation with, "No thanks, I better get back on the road before the snow gets worse." As I was driving away, I see that he's walking behind the restrooms, so I think to myself, what the heck was that all about? My mind is racing and retracing my last few stops. How did this guy know that I was having mechanical problems with my truck? I suddenly thought back to the rest stop in California and remembering that car that was parked next to me. Could he have done something to the wiring of my truck while I was in the restroom? A few more miles down the road, I wasn't having any new problems with my lights, but I did have to stop at a gas station to fill up. In the state of Oregon, they don't let you pump your own gas, so while I was waiting for the attendant, I decided to go in and grab a drink. As I was waiting for my fueling, I walk around my truck and look for any signs of tampering, and then noticed up near the front fender of the truck, I could see some smears that I wasn't really sure of. I just told myself, "You're just freaking yourself out." As soon as the attendant filled up my tank, I jumped back into the truck, and just as I was pulling out of the gas station, I see a car parked in the corner of the gas station's parking lot. Someone was inside, staring at me. I tell myself that I'm just being paranoid, but this car looked a lot like the one that I had seen in California. Was that old man following me? Was he waiting for the right time and place to sabotage my vehicle? As I continued driving, the snow became a bit more concerning. I didn't grow up in an area that had heavy snowfall, but I did have a little bit of experience driving in the snow, but not enough to know when things became too hazardous. I looked out my rearview mirror and see a pair of headlights trailing behind me, which was odd because most drivers just passed me up, but this person was tailing me. I was already going well under the speed limit, and I slowed down a bit more, but still, the driver was not passing me. I was approaching Portland, Oregon. It was still dark out, and the snow was still lightly falling. I decided that I would pull over again, and maybe the car that was behind me would pass. I take the next exit, and in front of me is another gas station with a patrol car parked out front. I immediately pulled up next to the cruiser and got out. There was a lady police officer there, and I start making a conversation with her about the snow and the expected conditions. I was thinking about telling her about the car behind me, but suddenly I felt kinda silly about it. What was I going to say? "Hey officer, I think I'm being followed by an old man who may or may not have done something to my truck." She was very nice, and she asked me where I was going and where I came from. I kept looking around to see if I could spot the car, but it was nowhere in sight. She suggested that I stop for the night and starts telling me about the dangers of driving without proper sleep, and tells me that if I go down the road a couple blocks, there is a motel behind a gas station. I decided that she was right. The stress of this entire situation was exhausting. Hopefully by the time I get back out on the road, the snow would be gone and I would be more rested. As I pulled up to the motel, I decided to park my truck behind the building so it wouldn't be seen from the road. I go to my hotel room as quickly as I could and lock the door. Honestly, I didn't get much rest. I stayed up and watched TV and nodded off here and there, jumping at every noise I heard outside. My mind kept racing back, recalling all the events from before the California border, up to my conversation with the police officer. Maybe he saw me talking to the cop and decided to back off. Maybe he was waiting for me to pull over at another rest stop to carry out whatever his plan was. Why would a stranger invite another stranger into his house in the middle of the night at a rest stop? And why did he ask if I was having problems with my truck? This all felt too strange to just be a coincidence. Finally, at around 7 a.m., I decided that enough was enough. I got up, had myself a big breakfast before checking out of the hotel, and continued on my trip to the office. Thankfully, nothing else strange happened, but I always wondered about that night. Call me paranoid, but something deep down tells me that I interrupted that old man from doing something else to my truck at the rest stop in Oregon. Maybe he was part of a robbery plot for whatever was in the back of my truck. I guess I'll never know. I just feel like I avoided something terrible happening to me.
This happened back when I was 8 years old. Back then, I had a friend named Max. Max and I were friends from school and would hang out at each other's houses. I remember that one Friday night, I got invited to sleep over at his house. For the most part, Max's family had a pretty average house in a common neighborhood. The living room of the house was at the front end, and the kitchen was towards the back. The bedrooms were located upstairs. So I went to his house after school with my sleeping bag, toothbrush, and some other stuff. My mom was going to pick me up from his house the next morning. When I got there, I remember I had pizza with Max and his family and we hung out. Later on in the night, I don't remember exactly why, but for some reason we were going to sleep in the living room. Maybe it was because that's where the TV was, or maybe it was just because there was more space there. But both Max and I put our sleeping bags on the floor down in the living room. When it got late, Max's parents and sister went up to bed, and the two of us hung out in the living room. We didn't stay up that much longer though, because Max got tired pretty quickly. I remember that he got into his sleeping bag and was soon out. I, on the other hand, was not that tired. I remember laying down, getting under my covers, and closing my eyes, but for some reason, I just couldn't sleep. I really didn't feel tired at all. I didn't have a cell phone or anything way back then, so I was pretty bored. I was just laying there in the dark, looking around the living room, or trying to sleep. This went on for what felt like a really long time. I would say that it was at least 30 minutes to an hour. The house was very dark, and also completely silent. Then, suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of the garage door open. It was the door that led from the garage to the pantry, which was next to the dining room. When I heard it, I was really surprised. I had no idea who that would be. For a moment, I thought maybe it was Max's father, but I had literally seen everybody in his family go up to bed in the other direction. I also could not see the garage door from where I was. You see, the living room was completely closed off from that part of the house. You had to go around a corner and enter the kitchen. Then you would have a view of the dining room and pantry area. I could only see a small part of the kitchen from where I was, and it was the opposite direction. After I heard the door open, I briefly heard footsteps, which were really quiet, but then things were pretty much silent again. I quickly became really nervous, fearing that it might be an intruder. I was expecting whoever it was to probably walk through the kitchen and either go into the living room or go upstairs. Either way, that would be walking by me if they did. I laid in my sleeping bag and did not make a sound at all, but I did look over to the corner. I didn't see anything, but I was half expecting to see somebody walk around the corner at any moment. But as I continued to watch, I didn't see anyone. I did not hear anything more either. I definitely was not tired now. I just kept laying there, not knowing what to do or what was going on for the longest time. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, I still hadn't heard or seen anything, and I decided to wake Max up. I went over to him and tapped his shoulder. After a few tries, he awoke, and he asked me what was going on. I told him that I heard the garage door to the house open, and I thought that somebody had entered. He asked me if I was joking, and when I said no, he seemed to wake up. After whispering to each other and discussing it for a few moments, we decided to go and look. I was pretty nervous, but Max and I got up and walked over to the corner to go and see. We walked over, and right before we reached the wall and entrance of the kitchen, we heard the sound of the door opening again. Then, as we looked around the corner, we were just in time to see the garage door closing and somebody walking out of it. We did not get a good look at all of who the person was, but we could tell that somebody had been there. After the door to the garage shut, Max and I were both completely shocked. Max then ran over to the garage door and locked it. After that, he sprinted back over to the living room and said he was going to wake up his parents. I waited in the living room as Max went upstairs and returned about a minute later with his parents. They came down, and Max's father walked into the garage. We discussed what happened with his mother, and a few minutes later, his father returned inside. He said that whoever was there had left. Max's father even looked around the backyard a little bit and was confident that he didn't see anyone. At that point, everybody pretty much went back to bed. Max's parents went back upstairs, and Max and I got back into our sleeping bags. Now, Max once again fell asleep relatively fast, and I once more could not. I laid there awake for at least another 30 minutes. Things were completely silent. However, I finally started to feel relaxed and even a little bit sleepy. But just then, those feelings were interrupted when I heard the garage doorknob turn. With it being locked though, the door did not open. I figured that the person was back. Luckily, they were not able to get inside. I just heard them try the door that one time. I kept laying there and listening. There were no more noises. Eventually, I was able to fall asleep. The next morning, I told Max about hearing the doorknob turn again the previous night. We told his parents as well, and his dad searched the entire property. However, whoever had been there must have actually been gone then, because he didn't find anything. My mom soon came and picked me up after that. I didn't really hear anything more of it from Max. I stayed over at his house a few more times, and nothing like that ever happened again.
I'm sharing this story anonymously for reasons that will become obvious later on. And before we get into this, I just want to preface this experience and warn everyone listening. This is probably going to be one of the most fucked up stories you've heard in a while. I was inspired to share this when I saw how poorly the release of the Epstein files was handled. Not to suggest that my story has anything to do with that, but to let young folks know that these sadistic, hellbound demons have been doing this sort of bullshit for a very long time, and they always pay off the right people to get away with it. And then guys like me are labeled conspiracy theorists, but the truth is that it's more convenient for people to buy into the lies. Anyway, this happened during the summer of 1987, on a sunny afternoon in the Sunshine State. I worked for the Coast Guard back in those days, but on that day, I was off duty, after working a string of 12-hour shifts pulling weakened boaters out of trouble. I was doing some fishing in my little Ranger boat. I had my cooler of beer, my fishing rod, and was listening to a baseball game over the radio. I eventually motored out past the markers into open water, then cut the engine off a few miles offshore, allowing the current to do the work. I wasn't getting any bites, but I was too angry at the Mets to care. There was no one out on the water that day. I fished around this area a few times before, but never in this particular section. I was pretty sure I was off the coast of some private property, but there was no signage to indicate so. So I carried on. I would say it was around 4, maybe 4:30, when I spotted something in the water, maybe 3/4 of a mile west. At first, I thought it was a freighter, or maybe a cruise ship, but as I drifted closer, I saw that it was a yacht, the kind you see tied up at the fancy marinas in Fort Lauderdale. The ones that make you wonder who on earth could afford them, except this one wasn't moving at all. And there was no anchor chain. It looked like it was just drifting. I throttled up to it, curious. Yachts this size just don't go adrift without someone noticing. Maybe there was engine trouble, or maybe there was a medical emergency. I grabbed my bullhorn. "Hello, is anyone there? Do you need assistance?" No one responded. I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. I could see a name on the stern now. Serafina, in gold script. The deck looked deserted. I had an inkling that this could be an illegal drug transport vessel. We dealt with those a lot back in those days. But I figured even the drug cartels wouldn't want a yacht of this size drifting off the coast to be spotted by some asshole in a fishing boat. It was more likely that something happened on board, and the boat was either abandoned, or someone was below deck, incapacitated. I should have turned around, but I had spent enough years in the Guard pulling people out of bad situations to know that silence on the water usually means trouble. I eased my boat alongside and tied up to the platform, then climbed aboard onto the yacht's main deck. "Hello? Anyone aboard?" No answer. The yacht looked pristine, cushions tight, no cups or towels scattered around, no sign of recent use. The salon doors were open, so I stepped inside, keeping one hand on the knife on my belt. "Hello? Is anyone here?" I called again. Still nothing. The interior looked how you would expect it to. Cream leather, polished wood. Whoever owned this boat had some serious money. I then noticed a half-finished drink sitting on the bar. The ice was almost gone, and a pool of water was below it. Remembering this still gives me the chills, because it was the first indication that I wasn't alone. I moved toward a stairwell that led to the lower cabins. That's when I heard it. A low, wet sound. Not mechanical. It was like someone chewing something. My stomach dropped. I drew my knife. I had a .38 back on the Ranger, but I was too caught up in the moment to go back to get it. The sound grew louder as I eased down the steps. The lower corridor was dim. The doors to the guest cabins were all closed, except for one at the far end, where the sound was coming from. I rounded the doorway and froze. I could not believe what I saw. There was an older man, maybe late 60s, completely naked. He appeared to be wearing a pair of headphones that were connected to a record player behind him. He was kneeling on the carpet. In front of him was a boy. Couldn't have been older than 10. Most of his face was gone. The old man was eating him, making that wet sound. I like to think the boy was already dead, but I swear I could see his lower jaw moving, with his eyes wide open. The man's head then snapped up. His mouth was red, with strings of tissue hanging from his chin. Eyes wide, pupils blown. I recognized that look. He was on something. "Who the hell are you?" he snarled. I turned and ran. I still kick myself mentally for not burying that knife into that man's head. I ran across the salon, back out onto the deck. My heart was pounding as I vaulted for the rail. I yanked the Ranger's line free and shoved off hard. I then rammed the throttle forward. I was maybe 100 yards out when the first crack came. Sharp, flat, louder than the motor. I ducked instinctively, then glanced back. I could see someone on the yacht's deck, aiming a rifle. Another shot rang out. But fortunately, he missed again. I kept the throttle pinned, not looking back until the yacht was just a white speck against the horizon. My hand shook so bad, I could barely hold course. Back at the dock, I called it in on a payphone outside the marina office. First, local PD. Then, my watchmaster at the station. I told them everything, and they took it serious. 30 minutes later, I saw choppers combing the area. I gave my statement, giving every detail I could. I wanted this man to be found and arrested. I also felt overwhelming regret for not taking matters into my own hands. This is something that still haunts me to this day. I came face to face with pure evil, and I fled like a coward. Back then, I was naively patriotic and believed that the law holds people accountable, even if they have deep pockets. I know better now. A day later, I got the call. Not from the local PD, but from my own Master Chief. He told me to report to the office ASAP. I drove to the station with a knotted stomach. I could tell this was serious. Whatever he wanted to tell me, he wanted to do so in person. When I got there, he slid a single piece of paper across his desk. It was a typed memo. There was a classified stamp crossed out, but still visible. The incident you reported has been handled. Handled how? Handled. The vessel was recovered. There were no bodies and no evidence of foul play. Official finding, mechanical failure. Accidental grounding later that night. Case closed. But, sir, there was a kid. And the guy was... I know what you reported. And I'm telling you, that didn't happen. That's bullshit, sir. He got up and closed his office door. You're going to take some time off, and you're going to forget all about this. You mention this to the press, to anyone, and your time in the service ends tomorrow. Understand? Orders came down directly from the top this morning. I suggest you forget all about this, and be grateful that you're not being arrested for trespassing. You were fishing in private waters. I was in shock, completely dumbfounded. The chief then took a seat directly next to me and spoke in a low voice. Look, I like you, so I'm going to give it to you straight. They're going to make life hell for you and your family. For your sake and for theirs. Forget about this. I drove home that day, feeling numb. I sat in the driveway for a long time with the engine running. I can still hear it sometimes, that awful wet, chewing sound. The man's eyes looking up at me, not afraid, just annoyed that someone had interrupted him. I don't know who he was, but I do know this. He wasn't some drifter or junkie who stumbled onto a boat. He had money, connections, people who could make a crime scene vanish and threaten a Coast Guard man's career to keep quiet. I think about the kind of people who can do that, the kind who drift through the world, untouchable, indulging in things the rest of us couldn't even imagine, the kind that get protected when the rest of us will be locked away forever. I kept my mouth shut for almost 40 years, and I don't do much fishing these days. But when I do see a big white yacht in the water, I flip it off. When I went home for 3 weeks about a month and a half ago, my dad and I decided we should do a bit of night fishing. I'm not a huge fan of night fishing, or any sort of fishing, or my dad for that matter. Our personalities are way too similar, and if you leave us together for more than an hour, there may be blood left over by the time he and I are done playing several dozen rounds of fisticuffs between the stubborn arguing and shouting. Anyways, Dad decided to take me to this river up by our new house that they had just finished building. My mom and brother stayed behind while we made our way through the dark woods. Now my family lives in Oregon, and the river was about 1.5 miles from my family's property, over massive fallen trees and stumps that I could easily trip on. Not knowing the lay of the land, my dad merely scoffed at me and reminded me that city living makes you soft. He didn't use those words exactly, just something along those lines, like some stereotypical cowboy from a Western film. I blamed the fact that I didn't know this area as well as he did, and things just spiraled downhill from there, and arguing broke out between us, making the peaceful night loud and chaotic. We didn't stop arguing the entire way down to the river, my father critiquing my less than Christian lifestyle, while I criticized his manner of parenting my 20-year-old autistic brother. By the time we got to the river, we finally settled into an awkward, tense silence as we got our gear out. I knew that this fight was far from over as I sat down on a fallen stump, freezing my ass off. I had lived in a warm climate for over a year, and honestly, coming out here was probably his way of punishing me for leaving the Pacific Northwest. We refused to talk to each other as our lights danced across the water. Then my dad suddenly stood up, his light landing on the other side of the river. There, on the other bank, stood a man, looking right at us. He wore a bright orange t-shirt and a pair of scraggly jeans. For the most part, he was pretty average looking, except for the machete that was hanging off his belt. My dad snapped at me to start packing up all of our things, and so I followed his command as my dad started shouting something at the man across the river. Their conversation was mostly lost to the roar of the white-capped river, but I could see the man making agitated sweeps with his hand every time I looked up. Their voices grew louder, and my fear grew with it. My father has never been one to carry protection in the woods, hence why I was born. This man was armed and possibly dangerous with that machete, and while we had a river between us, it was shallow and had plenty of places to cross. I had no doubts this man could be behind us in mere minutes. Had we wandered onto his property by mistake and just didn't know about it? "Drop the gear and let's go," my dad snarled at me as I took one last look up to see the man starting to walk in the water. My dad then put a firm hand on my shoulder and led me back into the woods toward our house. My dad is an ultra-marathoner. He runs like it's going out of style, and my mostly out-of-shape self probably wouldn't have been able to keep up. I couldn't hear if the man was coming after us. My heart was beating so loud in my ears, but I followed my dad so closely, I almost ran into him several times. Finally, we found our road and made a break back for my parents' house. As soon as we were through the front door, my dad had all the doors locked and was keeping watch out the windows, making sure no crazy men with machetes were creeping up to our house. Finally, when we figured out there were no men wearing orange t-shirts out there, we sat down and began to talk about our experience with my mom. We left at the part where we had been arguing, but told her everything else. We went to bed that night without apologizing. The next day, with the only gun he owned, my father and I walked back out into the woods after calling the police. They said that there was a man who enjoyed scaring people off the forest land, and that we shouldn't be too concerned about it. Feeling a bit sheepish, we went back to the place where we had left our gear, both of us apologizing for our lackluster behavior the night before. When we got back to what we believed to be the spot, we saw our fishing poles had been bent and the lines had been draped from tree to tree. The tackle box was gone. The good news is, me and my dad didn't fight again for the rest of my trip home. This went on for over the course of a year, with the last incident taking place in December of 2016. I used to own this green 1998 Toyota Camry. It was my grandmother's until she gifted it to my parents, who eventually gave it to me as my first car. It was nice and reliable. But I have this bad habit of letting my cars accumulate a bunch of stuff before cleaning them out. Since I still lived with my parents, they would use the car from time to time if they needed. One day, I noticed a bunch of fishing lines with hooks on them in the back of my car. On one of those rare occasions that I actually cleaned it out, a bunch of hooks were embedded into the upholstery, and more are between the creases on the seat. It takes me a while to get them all out, almost pricking myself several times while doing it. I have no idea how long they were there, as the last time I had cleaned my car out was months ago. At any rate, I'm annoyed. At first, I thought my dad had put them in there, as he had recently used this car to transport a bunch of old junk for a garage sale. But when I asked him about it, he told me that he's never seen any fishing hooks or lines in any of the old stuff of ours, and nobody in my family even fishes, so it wouldn't make any sense for us to have it. He's also the only other person that has used my car in the past year or two. I'm the kind of person who locks everything every night. I triple check my car doors, and if I'm even a little uncertain as to whether or not I locked up, I will go back to my car and check, despite any inconvenience. I also park it where I can see it from my bedroom window and hear if anyone is tampering with it, so I doubt anyone could have broken in, and I just assumed Dad missed it and didn't think any more of it. Until a month later, when I found even more fishing hooks in my back seat. At this point, I asked my dad about it again, but he figured that I was either pulling a weird prank on him or someone is breaking into my car. I wonder why, though, they would break into my car, not steal anything out of it, and leave fishing hooks inside. It just didn't make any sense to me. To give you an idea about how weird this is, I live in a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, and even have a private Facebook group that started because of a drug house at the end of the street cropping up, though at this point it was no longer there. The group became sort of a neighborhood watch that always posts whenever something suspicious happens around here. So there isn't any neighbors I don't know for miles, and none of the ones I do know would do something this shady. Again, without any explanation or clear motive, it fades into the back of my mind as the days and weeks pass. I eventually get a new job selling mattresses, as I had been unemployed focusing on school for a while. I move out of my parents' house to go live with my girlfriend, and this is where things turn from weird to extremely unsettling. One night, we decide to go to a nearby store to get something to make food with. When I notice in my back seat, there was a bunch of fishing lines and hooks again. Startled, I looked around for any sign of anyone being nearby. I told my girlfriend to go back into the house, and I sit up and stare at my car from our bedroom window until morning comes. I don't see anyone or anything. That morning, I get ready for work, and my girlfriend gets ready for college courses, and we leave. The store I was working at during this time had this weird L-shaped design to it, with two separate entrances and a cafe taking up the space in between them. There was one entrance that was easily visible from the front desk, and another that you would have to get up and go see, as I was closing up for the night after the last incident. I go to turn off the open signs, and see in the center of the obscured hallway an entire roll of fishing line coiled up, with part of the line leading to the door where a pile of hooks sat. I had no customers that day and didn't hear the alarm going off. I then noticed that someone had turned the door alarms off, but neither I nor my only coworker had ever tampered with that device before, and it was behind the front desk. I was shaking. Someone had been stalking me and leaving these hooks and lines for me to see, but I had no idea what to do. Call the police? Other than the fishing lines and hooks, there was really nothing to trace back to anyone. My store had no security cameras. Corporate would never agree to install them. I figured the best I could do would be to not appear as frightened as I was, in case whoever was doing this was watching and recording me. I thought that if seeing something like this didn't make me go about my day differently, and I wouldn't give whatever reaction this person was looking for, they would just give up and go away. For several more months, I would find fishing lines and hooks in my car, despite it being locked, and my parents, being the only people with extra keys, being much too busy with the construction of their new house and their jobs to take time out of their day to prank me. Once or twice, I would leave notes in my car asking whoever it was why they were doing this, and to please stop. I would find the notes were gone whenever the lines and hooks reappeared, but never got a response. Eventually, after a series of misunderstandings and disagreements with my girlfriend's family, I decided to move out of my girlfriend's house and rented out an apartment with a couple of my friends until my parents' new house could be completed. The very last time I had an encounter with the lines and the hooks, I came home from work to find them strewn about the living room. Stuff had been knocked over, and a few things were broken. However, nothing was taken. My friend, his girlfriend, and their baby were gone at the time, so no one was there when this happened, except for the cats, who were absolutely spooked and wouldn't come out from under the bed for hours. To this day, I still don't know what this person wanted, why they were stalking me in the first place, or what the fishing lines and hooks meant. No one that I know is into fishing at all, and I don't go out of my way to make enemies or cross people. I honestly don't know if this person was someone I knew or a stranger who was very good at covering their tracks. What I know for sure is that I will have anxiety for the rest of my life over this, and I routinely stay up until 4 or 5 in the morning because, in addition to several other traumatizing experiences, this has made every bump in the night a potential threat for me. It's been about 10 years since I've seen anything more from this person, but instead of feeling reassured that it's finally over, I feel more uneasy that someone has followed me through the many changes in my life. Anyways, I hope you enjoy listening. I'm shaking as I type this out. I haven't really talked about it in great detail to anyone, because simply describing it makes me feel like a lunatic. Not only that, but I don't want to worry my friends and family when there's nothing that they can do about it. This will likely be a mystery that will never be solved.
The cabin was perfect. It was a 2-bedroom tucked into the pine trees, about 20 minutes outside of Mendocino. Little wraparound porch, string lights, one of those open concept kitchens with big windows, and this absurdly deep farmhouse sink. I loved every inch of that damn place. We booked it for our 3-year anniversary, just me and Alyssa. No kids, no work, no phone signal. I remember the first thing that she said when we walked in was, "It smells weird in here." I laughed, but she didn't. The host, Lorraine, had left this note on the countertop, handwritten. It said, "Welcome Brandon and Alyssa. Please make yourselves at home. There's wine in the fridge, firewood stacked out back, and a telescope on the deck. Enjoy the view. Sunsets here are everything." One note, the closet in the master bedroom is locked for storage. Please don't try to force it. Thank you. That was that. Warm, casual, totally normal, right? We unpacked, poured some wine, and took 100 selfies with the trees in the background. Everything felt pretty easy, except that closet. It was on the far wall of the bedroom, standard size, stock wide door with this old silver padlock on the latch. Not some high-end combo lock, just one of those clunky ones you can get at pretty much any hardware store. At first, I really didn't say anything, but Alyssa began noticing me glancing at it throughout the night, even while we brushed our teeth. "You're gonna be weird about that closet the whole trip, huh?" "No," I said back. "It's just a locked door and a house that's supposed to be ours for the weekend." "Storage," she reminded me. She said so in the note. But storage for what? It's a vacation rental, not a personal cabin. And that padlock looked pretty new. We laughed it off and went to bed early. And that was the last normal night that we had inside that house. The next day we were pretty busy. Coffee on the porch, a hike through the redwoods, took more dumb selfies at this overlook, and watched a hawk dive right through the fog. It was a perfect day. Still, every time we came back into the bedroom, my eyes would go straight back to that closet. It didn't do anything, it just sat there, unmoving and locked. But for me, it made that whole room feel off balance, like a splinter in your finger, small, invisible, but always there, always present. That night while Alyssa showered, I walked over to it, ran my hand along the grain of the wood. The padlock was old school, a solid metal shackle, key entry. I didn't touch it, just leaned in close. And I could swear when I did so, I heard breathing. Not loud, not even clear, just a faint, steady shift of air. I backed away and almost tripped over the nightstand. When Alyssa came out, towel wrapped around and smiling at me, I didn't say anything to her. I didn't want to ruin the night. We watched a movie, split the last of that wine, and then crawled into bed by 10. But sometime after midnight, I woke up. At first, groggily, I really wasn't sure why. But then I heard it, a soft thump from the closet. Not loud or frantic, just a dull, solid noise, like something shifting inside it. I held my breath, and then another thump, followed by a scratch. I reached over and Alyssa was dead asleep. The house was quiet, no pipes, no wind, no creaking floorboards, just that sound from the closet. I sat up, heart pounding, and just stared at the door. The padlock was still there. I got up and walked over, pressed my ear to the door. Nothing though. I waited a little longer. Then, right at the edge of my hearing, I heard it again, breathing. I sat up and didn't sleep the rest of the night, and the next morning, I told Alyssa. She laughed at me at first, thought I was winding her up or something, but when she saw my face, she stopped. "What kind of sound?" she asked me. Thumping, scratching, breathing. I know how all that sounds, but it's what I heard. She stared at the closet and bit her lip. "Do you think there's like a animal maybe in there?" "Too big." "What do you mean too big?" "I don't know the sound, it just felt big, like human." She stepped closer to the closet and looked at the padlock. "It's the same one, right?" "Yeah." We debated about calling the host, and eventually Alyssa wound up sending a text. "Hey, Brandon thought he heard something in the closet last night. Just want to make sure there's no animal or any issues. Thanks." We waited and didn't get a response. We checked our signal. No bars, so we tried the Wi-Fi. It's still out. That's when I remembered the welcome book saying there was a landline in the kitchen. I picked it up and, of course, no dial tone. That afternoon, Alyssa went to go lie down. I stood in the kitchen staring at the fridge, trying to psych myself up to make some kind of lunch. And then I took note of something. The wine bottle. It was on the counter. I know we left it on the coffee table. I walked into the living room, blanket folded, TV remote placed neatly in the center of the rug. Not how we left that either. Alyssa for sure hadn't done it. I asked her, and she swore she didn't. Then we realized we'd both been outside for a while earlier. Alone. Not long, but enough. Somebody had been inside. That night we barricaded the bedroom door with the dresser. Not because of the closet, because of everything else. No cell, no internet, no way to call out. Something had changed. We aren't alone out here. Not really. Alyssa tried her best to stay calm, but her eyes kept darting back and forth to that closet. "What if," she whispered to me, "what if somebody's living in there?" Her words sat in the air like smoke. I didn't answer her. At exactly 2:14 a.m., that scratching started up again. And then the knob turned. I watched it turn. The padlock held, but something pulled really hard. I watched the wood flex. Alyssa was awake now. She saw it too and clapped her hand over her mouth. We didn't move or breathe. Then the noise stopped and we waited. Long enough to convince ourselves, hopefully, it was over. Then came a voice from inside that closet. A dry, whispery rasp. "I'm cold." When the sun was up, we left. Didn't pack, didn't clean, didn't say goodbye. Just grabbed our shoes, our phones, and ran. The front door was still locked, but that back slider unlatched. We didn't look in the closet again. We didn't really want to know at this point what was behind it because whatever or whoever was in there wanted us to open it. And we almost did. 15 miles later, we hit the first gas station with signal. Alyssa called the sheriff's department in Mendocino County, filed a report, gave them the address, told them everything, word for word. The dispatcher was polite, said they'd send somebody out, but when we followed up 3 days later, there was no report filed. No record of anything at that cabin at the address, no listing under Lorraine's name. When I checked the rental site, the listing was gone, wiped clean, no history, no reviews, nothing. like it never even existed. Occasionally at night, I find myself thinking back to that voice, the way it sounded like it hadn't spoken in weeks, the way it said just those two words, cold. That wasn't a threat, but I don't really know what it was. I think if we answered back, if we had said anything back, if we tried to help, I'm not sure we would have made it out. We might be part of the closet now too. And then somebody else would be reading Lorraine's welcome note, drinking her wine, ignoring the locked door on that far wall. It was only supposed to be for one night, just a crash pad on the way to Flagstaff. Me and my friend Nate road tripping from LA, trying to make it to his cousin's wedding without coughing up any hotel money. We found this little place in the desert outside Kingman, cheap and clean. A small adobe-style house off a dirt road with gravel driveway and a sagging porch. It had character, 4 stars, no real red flags. And it was available for that one night only. I snapped it up in 5 minutes flat. We got there just around 8 p.m. Sun was already gone, air still warm around us. My phone was on 3% battery, but I had the check-in instructions saved. Thank God. Key under the fake rock by the front steps. Simple enough. I grabbed it and walked to the door and stopped because, well, it was already open. Just slightly. Nate glanced over at me. Did you open it? No, dude, I just got the key. He slowly pushed it the rest of the way open and the lights were on. We both stood there for a second, long enough to notice the TV flickering in the living room, and a beer can on the kitchen island, and a pair of sandals by the door. Somebody was already here. I double-checked the listing. August 12th, 1 night, 2 guests. Reservation confirmed. Then a voice from inside. Hello? 2 people stepped around the corner. A couple, mid-30s maybe, normal looking, slightly confused. Just like us. A guy was holding his phone. Are you the owners? No, I said back. We booked this place tonight. They both immediately looked at each other. So did we. So we both pulled up our confirmations. Same address, same date, same check-in instructions. Nate and the guy walked outside to call the host, and of course, no answer. I stayed in the kitchen, awkwardly sipping water from the sink while the woman made small talk. This is nuts, she said. We stayed at like 20 rentals. This has never happened to us. We agreed to be chill, said it was probably some kind of glitch. Look, let's just stay on opposite ends of the house, the guy said, and we'll leave first thing in the morning. It wasn't ideal, but we were both really tired. The place had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. There was plenty of space. I guess we figured we can survive 1 night. But we shouldn't have stayed, because those people weren't who they said they were, and by morning, only 1 pair of shoes was still by the front door. That first hour was completely fine. We stayed in our room, and they stayed in theirs. Everybody was making these nervous jokes about tech glitches and modern problems. I played music low on my phone while Nate scrolled through Instagram, and eventually we both started to nod off. Then, out of nowhere, the lights go out, and not just in our room, the whole house. A hard click like a breaker's flipping. Nate sat up. Hey, you hear that? I opened up the door. The hallway was pitch black. Hey, I called out. You guys good? No answer. I stepped forward and the floorboards creaked below me. That kind of creak you feel in your bones more than your actual ears. I found the kitchen by memory, grabbed my phone for light and aimed it around me. The breaker panel was just outside on the porch, so I went to the front door. I stopped. The sandals that were there earlier now were gone, and a breeze was moving through the house. Then a door slammed somewhere in the back. We got the power back on by flipping the main breaker, but the other couple didn't come out of the room after that. Nate knocked once lightly. Hey, everything all right in there? He was only met with silence. We went back to our room and locked the door, and that's when we noticed something. My duffel bag was now open. Not how I left that. Nate's wallet was on the floor, cards pulled halfway out. He picked it up slowly. "Did you?" I shook my head. We sat there for a long time, not talking, just listening. Every now and again, there'd be a soft shuffle in the hall, and once I heard water run for 5 seconds, then shut off. Around 3 a.m., I had to piss, but I didn't want to leave the room. I couldn't hold it anymore. I eased the door open, barefoot, phone in hand. The hallway light was off again. I crept toward the bathroom, passing the living room, and stopped cold. The woman was standing there, in the corner, not moving, just standing, barefoot, facing the wall, arms down at her sides. Almost like she'd been placed there, full Blair Witch bullshit. I froze and she didn't react, not even when the floor creaked under my feet. I backed up slowly and made it to the bathroom and locked the door. Inside, the cabinet under the sink was wide open. Inside that, my backpack. All right, I'm done. Time to fucking bounce. I woke Nate, told him what I saw, and he didn't argue. We threw our shit together fast and made for the front door. And now it was locked. Not deadbolted, but chained from the inside. That chain had not been there when we arrived. Nate moved to unlock it. That's when the guy stepped out of the second bedroom, right behind him, and he had a bat in his hand. Aluminum, clean, and brand new. "You guys leaving already?" he asked. I moved between them slowly. Yeah, we're heading out, early start." He smiled. "You sure? You've only been here for a few hours." And that's when I noticed this scar, a thick white line across his throat, like somebody had already tried to cut him a long time ago. He saw me looking and his smile widened. From behind me, the woman whispered, "We just wanted some company." Nate unlocked the chain and I yanked the door open, and we both ran. Didn't stop until we hit the car. We jumped in, slammed the doors, and started it up with shaking hands. They didn't follow. They just stood in the doorway, watching us drive away. We filed a report the next morning. Cops visited the rental, found nothing. No couple, no bat, no signs of any kind of break-in. When they pulled the reservation logs from the property manager, there was only one booking listing for that night, ours. They checked the key logs, only one use on the key box, ours. There's no sign or record of anybody else being there. And the strange part, the owners hadn't rented that house in almost a year, said that they'd taken it offline after a break-in. When the property manager asked us who gave us the link, we pulled it up and of course, listing gone, wiped. The only thing left in the browser history was this weird dead redirect, something called sharebnb.co/just4you. We waited weeks for answers and there never were any. A cop said the locks hadn't been tampered with, the host hadn't given out any kind of spare key. No prints besides ours, no damage, no physical evidence, no nothing. They treated us like we were exaggerating something, maybe mistaken, maybe high. But I remember the bat. I remember the woman staring at the wall like she was possessed. I remember my backpack moved into a space that I hadn't touched, a very weird one at that. We tried to track that link again, sharebnb.co/just4you, but it was gone. Even the cached version led nowhere, a blank page with the words, "Thank you for booking." And beneath that, in this tiny gray font, "More guests arrive every day." We booked that cabin because we wanted some kind of quiet. My wife Laura needed a break from work and the kids were burnt out from school, and I just wanted to feel like a man again. Build some fires, grill some steaks, let my youngest shoot a BB gun at cans from the deck, pretend that we were pioneers instead of just tired people from Phoenix. It was a rental just outside of Pine Top, up past the ski cabins and seasonal condos, far enough away from the main road that the last stretch was all dirt and pine needles. The photos made it look rustic, but clean. Big stone fireplace, bunk beds, a wraparound porch with a hot tub that barely worked but looked really great in those pictures. And no cell service. That was really the appeal to us. No buzzing or news, no texts from work, just the five of us, me, Lauren, our teenage daughter Emma, and the twins, Ryan and Blake, 9 years old and always yelling about something. We got there on a Thursday afternoon. Weather was perfect. The air had that high country scent, half pine, half soil, like the whole mountain was freshly watered. We unpacked, picked bedrooms, and let the kids explore the trails behind the house. It really did feel like a reset. Dinner was burgers on the grill, sunset through the trees, s'mores over the fire pit. Emma rolled her eyes at the twins and pretended not to be having fun. Laura sipped red wine from a camping mug and said, "We should do this every year." It really was the kind of night that you don't realize you'll miss until it's gone. Then a knock came at 3 a.m., 3 sharp raps, right at the front door. I sat up in bed, heart pounding like I'd been yanked from underwater. Laura whispered to me, "What was that?" "I don't know. Stay here." I grabbed the fireplace poker and crept down the stairs barefoot. The knock didn't come again. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing, just moonlight and trees. So I opened up the door. Nobody there, no footprints, no wind, just the cold, quiet woods and the sound of blood in my ears. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt and checked the windows one by one. Still didn't see anything. Not a branch out of place, not even a breeze. So I told myself maybe it was an animal, a falling pine cone. Hell, maybe the twins left something against the door that tipped over. Now, I didn't believe it, of course, but I needed to say it. Laura didn't ask any questions when I got back into bed. Just pulled the blanket tighter and slid closer to me. The next morning, I checked the front porch again. Still nothing, but there were boot prints and they weren't ours. They weren't there the day before either. Big ones, treaded. Not hiking boots, work boots. I followed them. They started down the gravel drive and led up to the porch steps and then stopped at the front door. No return trail though, just a set of tracks coming in from the woods. I didn't tell Laura. I just kept an eye out. Didn't let the kids go exploring that day. Said there were bears in the area and I didn't want to risk it. I checked my phone. Still no service. I tried the cabin's emergency Wi-Fi hotspot and of course it was dead. The landline by the kitchen was unplugged. Some frayed wires with no dial tone. No signal, no internet, no fallback. It was just us. That night I locked everything down. Windows, curtains, and I left the outside lights on. But at 3 a.m. once more, the knocking came back. Same rhythm, same 3 knocks. This time Laura actually heard it too. She sat up straight first, eyes wide. "That's not an animal." I nodded back at her. She reached for her phone, but I already knew it was no help. I got out of bed and grabbed that same poker and moved slowly down the hallway. When I reached the living room, I didn't go to the door right away this time. I looked out the side window first and saw somebody standing on the porch. Not moving, not speaking, just standing. His face was in shadow, wearing something heavy like a jacket, arms at his sides, head tilted slightly like he was listening. Then, like he felt me watching, he turned and looked straight at the window, and I quickly ducked out of view. I didn't breathe, I didn't blink, and when I looked again, he was gone. I didn't sleep and stayed up the rest of the night, and at sunrise I walked the perimeter. Boot prints were everywhere this time, around the porch, around the sides, by the window, even at the back door, like he'd been circling while we slept. When I went to check our SUV, the tires were slashed, all 4, clean cuts. Then I had to tell Laura everything, the guy, the footprints, the tires. I thought that she'd fall apart. Instead, she went into triage mode, packed snacks, filled the bathtubs, charged flashlights, and the kids started asking questions we didn't want to answer. I found a trail cam nailed to a pine tree just off the back deck, and that wasn't ours, not part of the listing at least, and definitely not mentioned in the binder. I pulled a card and popped it into my laptop. Each file was named by timestamp, and each one was a photo, black and white, motion triggered. At first, all of the files were us, unpacking the car, kids running down the trail, me at the grill. Then came the night shots, us through the window, sleeping, sitting at dinner, Laura brushing her teeth, me reading a book, all taken from that tree line. Then the final file, it was from the night before, a full body shot. That man, standing on the porch, inches from the door, looking into the camera, his face lit by the porch light. Not a ski mask, no balaclava, just a man's face, plain and unbothered. That night we took turns watching the windows. Laura kept the kids in our room, reading bedtime stories, and she didn't finish. At 3 a.m. we heard footsteps on the roof. That wasn't a bird or the wind. Footsteps, slow and creeping. It went from one side of the house to the other. I raised that poker, and Laura grabbed the fire extinguisher. We waited. A soft clatter then came from the chimney. At dawn, I spotted something on the back deck, nailed to the railing with a screwdriver. A photo, one of the trail cam prints. Our family sitting at dinner, Emma smiling, Laura was mid-laugh and me mid-bite. Scrawled across the bottom in thick black marker, "Thank you for staying." We left as soon as the sun cleared, didn't even drive the SUV, we hiked out. Me still with that fire poker, Laura with the twins, and Emma dragging a duffel bag. It took us almost 2 hours on foot to reach the main road. I flagged down a tow truck, and the guy thought I was crazy until I showed him the photo. He didn't really ask many questions after that, just nodded and gave us a ride back into town. He even agreed to go pick up our car after we gave him the address. The police were polite, not helpful. They took my statement, looked at the tire tracks, the trail cam, the prints in the dirt, said they'd check the local trail cams, maybe put in a request for footage from nearby hunting blinds. But without a name or suspect, I knew nothing would really come of it. It was just another trespassing incident. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no real damage. When I asked him about the trail cam, the deputy just shrugged at me. There's a lot of creeps out there, and some just want to watch. This happened around 2010 when I was still a kid. We lived in a small house surrounded by trees, a place that felt tucked away but was only a few minutes from town. It was me, my mom, my dad, my cousin, my aunt, and her husband all under the same roof. Most of the days were pretty ordinary. My cousin and I were usually watched by my mom while everybody else went to work. The air always smelled like pine, and deer would wander through the yard pretty much daily. The three of us spent a lot of time in the house alone, the kind of home that seemed peaceful by day and a little eerie by night. We had only one neighbor, an older man who mostly kept to himself, and at that age, I didn't think twice about being isolated. It was just a normal life. Bugs, animals, big storms, it was all routine. The strange thing about what happened that day is that everybody remembers it clearly, yet none of us remember it the same way. In my version, my mom was doing my hair. She loved to braid it every morning. I was wearing a plain white t-shirt, sitting still while she worked her fingers through my hair when everything in the room suddenly goes red. At first, I assumed I was imagining it, but the light got stronger until it filled every corner. I remember the walls glowing, the floorboards picking up the color like blood-tinted glass. It wasn't a sunset, way too fast and bright. I looked up from my lap and the whole world felt slow, as if time itself had paused, and I couldn't even hear my heartbeat. The windows in front of me were uncovered. The light came straight through them, thick and steady, almost humming in a way that I could feel in my teeth. I glanced up toward my mom, expecting her to move, but she was frozen, mid-gesture, eyes wide. My cousin had backed into the far corner of the room and was staring toward the ceiling. For a moment, I really thought everything outside must be burning, but there was no smoke. The air didn't even feel warm. It was just red, pure red, with no shadows, no shapes, and no sounds. Then it vanished. One blink, it's there. Next, it's gone. Time seemed to slam back to normal speed. The sound of the clock returned, and I could hear birds again. I remember standing there shaking and asked my mom what that was. She stared at the window for a few moments before finally saying that she didn't know. Her version doesn't match mine. She said that she wasn't doing my hair at all. She'd been helping me with homework at the table when the red light came in. She swore that she grabbed both me and my cousin and hid in the corner, holding on until it faded completely. She remembers being certain that something was outside, though she never saw what it was. We've compared memories dozens of times now, and she insists that her story is true. I'm just as sure about mine. My cousin, however, never really likes to talk about it, and when he does, it's short and very uneasy. He says the light had weight to it, that it pressed down on him, but he kind of clams up after that. He never told us which version that he remembers, or if he remembers something different entirely. As the years pass on, the event never really leaves us. Sometimes we'll laugh about it, saying we were abducted, came back with different memories, but when I mention it now, my mom will still tense up. She hates red light too, can't stand it. If I use red light therapy or even a red night lamp, she gets anxious, will tell me to turn it off. A few years ago, I actually stumbled across a local article online about people seeing these strange lights in that same area around the same time. Some would claim it's a UFO sighting, and we ended up moving away long before, but reading that still made my stomach drop. Now personally, I never saw a craft, I never saw any figures, never even heard a sound. All I know is that time felt thin, the air felt heavy, and the world went red. Strangest experience of my life for sure. I still wonder what happened that day, and I guess I'll never really understand it completely. Something that brushed against us for a second then slipped away, leaving only a partial memory in its wake. I used to live in a suburban neighborhood inside Tennessee. When you grow up in a place like this, you learn early that the forests aren't for playing. The woods just don't play in the South. My sister and I were strictly told to never go in the forest alone. I moved away when I was 8, and this happened right around that time. My friend had come over for a play date. We were hanging out in my backyard. Now, the yard is kind of strange. It sloped down sharply and ended right at the edge of the huge forest. That mattered because once you go down the hill, you couldn't really hear anybody on the deck unless they were yelling. There was this open tree line that led to a narrow trail winding deep into the woods. Being young and dumb, we thought it'd be fun to explore it. I didn't feel like running all the way back up the hill to tell my parents where we were going, so I didn't. We just kind of went. At first, everything was fine. We played around, threw some sticks, had some laughs, but when we started heading back towards my house, I heard something. Footsteps or branches snapping nearby. It felt like danger. I got this heavy feeling in my stomach like something or someone was watching us. My friend didn't say anything, but she didn't argue when I said that we should hurry back. Just as we reached the edge of the forest, I hear my mom's voice. She was calling for me somewhere off in the trees, saying that she was hurt, needed my help. That froze me. It was definitely her voice, same tone, same southern hint. It just didn't make any sense. That danger feeling grew and grew. My head was telling me, go help her, but my gut was screaming to run. I took a few steps toward the voice before my friend grabbed my arm, and in that moment, the quote-unquote spell broke. My heart slammed into my chest, and my friend was pointing back up toward the deck. When I looked up, there was my mother, standing there waving, holding out popsicles. I could barely hear her calling out to us, but my friend had seen her walk outside. So we bolted up the hill as fast as we could. When we reached the porch, I asked my mom if she'd been in the woods. She frowned and said no, she'd been napping inside, woke up with this weird feeling that she needed to check on us. I never told her about the voice in the trees. I think she already knew that something was wrong, and I didn't really want to worry her anymore. That night after she tucked me in, I remember lying there in bed, staring out the window toward that same tree line. The moonlight was soft enough that I could see the shapes of the woods, the black outlines of branches shifting off in the wind. At first, all very normal. But then something else moved. A darker shape slid between the trees, almost like liquid. It paused, then turned as if it knew I was watching it. I ducked under the covers, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. And after that, I stopped sleeping with the blinds open. Even during the day, the woods around me would make me uneasy. Sometimes I'd catch flashes of something pale moving between the trees, or hear what sounded like breathing outside my window. A few weeks later, before we moved, my mom mentioned finding these claw marks on the back door. Thin, deep scratches, just below the handle, like somebody had been testing how to get inside. She said it was probably raccoons. Fair warning to anybody visiting, stay out of the woods. I know the locals know exactly what I'm talking about. When I was in 5th or 6th grade, I learned what it meant to be alone in a house that suddenly didn't really feel like ours. I'm gonna be honest, I don't tell this story very much. My little sister Kinsley and I both came down with chickenpox that week. We were blotched, itchy, half mad from trying not to scratch anything. Kinsley made sure that we stuck together, pressing her face against mine, making me play dolls and tag even when she was burning up. A day later, I was covered head to toe. She was thrilled. Mom was too. She said it'd be easier if we both just kind of got it out of the way at the same time. My mom did what most moms did there in the 90s. Oatmeal baths, calamine lotion, lukewarm ginger ale, along with some VHS tapes stacked on the coffee table. She had to work, same as Dad, and our timing really couldn't have been worse. My dad would leave before dawn. My mom hung on long enough to make us some toast, measure the antihistamine, and tape the emergency numbers to the fridge. She kissed Kinsley on the forehead, looked at me and said, "You're old enough to keep an eye on things." I believed her. 11 felt old, ancient. I was a man. By God, I had just been put in charge too, for real this time, and for the first time in my life. Sure, watching the house here and there for 30 minutes, no big deal, but getting to run the whole show all day with my sister to boot, it felt like I was just elected president. The house was quiet after she left, the heater ticking, pipes knocking, and the fridge giving its low moan every few minutes. Normal house sounds, safe and familiar to my ears. Kinsley and I built a fort out of blankets, watched cartoons until noon. We called it Fort Chickipaki. Crawling around inside the blankets and fabrics was a good way to itch our skin too, without actually scratching with our fingernails. We fought about which tape to play next, and she ended up picking Ferngully. I booed for a straight 5 minutes. The itching would come in waves, sharp little reminders that we were diseased but free. I liked it though, being out of school, having the house to ourselves. But I caved in, watched the movie anyway with her. Every now and again, I caught her reflections in the dark TV screen, 2 little speckled goblins, half dressed and scabbed up, laughing and just making it through. It felt like a small vacation, just with a few rules. Stay put, don't scratch, answer the phone if it's mom, and of course, lock the door. I remember how proud I actually felt locking the front door. By mid-morning, the light through the curtains had turned gold. The air in the house smelled like oatmeal and rubbing alcohol. Kinsley was humming to herself on the couch, tapping her legs, restless already. I thought the day would drag on like any other sick day, long, boring, and harmless. I didn't know the house could actually change sides though, and I didn't know family could too. The morning felt normal. Mom called around 9 to check in. I told her we were fine. She said that she'd grab some soup on lunch break, maybe even come home early. I told her not to worry. Big man words. Kinsley still sat there glued to the TV while I ended up taking a shower. My skin burned from the soap, but at least it quieted the itching a little bit. The water beat on the tile, steady and safe, and when I shut it off, the house was dead silent around me. I called out but didn't get an answer. I got dressed and walked into the hallway, and that's when I saw her leaning over the couch, face pressed up against the window. "What are you doing?" I asked her. She didn't move. "Uncle Dwayne's here." It caught me off guard. Dad's brother, always half drunk, sometimes mean and always unpredictable. I came to her side and looked for myself. This old truck sat at an angle in the driveway. Dwayne stomped through the yard in his denim jacket, pulling at boxes near the garage. He lifted a gas can, a bundle of cords, and tossed him into the truck bed. "It looks like he's just borrowing something," I said. I watched him wander, searching for whatever it might be. Sometimes he came to borrow tools or materials, whatever, so I really thought that's just what this was, one of those visits. And then he turned toward the house. "Duck," I whispered, and we dropped behind the couch. His boots then crunched their way toward the house and the porch steps creaked. The screen door opened, then the deadbolt clicked. He had a key though. The front door closed behind him and the sound was soft but final. I grabbed Kinsley's hand and whispered that we needed to go upstairs. We moved fast, skipping every noisy step into a room, and I locked that flimsy knob. Downstairs, it was silence again. The fridge door opened, a hiss of a beer can. He was inside, comfortable, like he was right at home. Kinsley trembled next to me. Why is he here? I didn't know. I crouched by the floor vent and just continued to listen. I heard him move through the living room, grabbing tapes, shoving things into a grocery sack. He wasn't looking for tools, he was just straight up taking stuff for himself. I mouthed that he was stealing. We waited and the TV came on. Then another can cracked open. He was settling in. I wanted to just wait it out, but time stretched and we were itchy. Finally, the TV went quiet. No footsteps, just the hum of the fridge. I whispered at Kinsley to stay here, and I slipped out, but Kinsley followed anyway. The house now smelled like beer and sweat. I stepped around this overturned chair, a heart pounding so loud that I could feel it in my teeth. The kitchen in front of me was wrecked, drawers open, fridge ransacked. The living room was too, but no Uncle Dwayne. Then I heard a low laugh from down the hall in my parents' room. I crept forward and peeked around the doorframe. He stood by my mom's dresser, a hand buried in her underwear drawer. He lifted a pair and sniffed them, pocketed them, and chuckled again. I gasped out loud and it gave myself away. He spun around, eyes red and wet. "The hell are you doing here?" And for a second we just stared at one another. And then he came for us. The beer can flew first, hitting the door and bursting. Foam sprayed across the carpet. "Come here, you little freaks." I pulled Kinsley down the hall. He followed, crashing into walls, knocking down pictures. "You spying on me?" We tore through the kitchen, socks slipping on linoleum. He grabbed at my shirt, missed only by inches. His breath hit me from the back of my neck, sour and rank. Uncle Dwayne always had really bad teeth, and I could smell the rot as he continued to chase me. I told Kinsley to run, and we cut through the dining room, looped around the table, and sprinted for the stairs, but he was too fast. I yanked Kinsley toward the back door instead. He slammed into the counter behind us, shouting, "I'll kill you!" The back door stuck. I twisted the lock and threw my shoulder into it. It burst open and cool morning air washed over us. We flew off the porch and down into the yard, and I heard him hit the door frame behind us, turning it into splinter on impact. I remember thinking I was being chased by a zombie. We sprinted for the fence. Ground tore underneath my feet. My hands hit the top board and we slipped. He was right behind me, shouting nothing but threats and curses. I pushed Kinsley up and over, and she stumbled and tumbled to the other side. I swung a leg up, and his hand caught my ankle. I yelled at him to let go, kicked, wild and desperately. My heel ended up hitting something soft. He grunted and then fell back. I rolled over the fence and hit dirt. The world went quiet except for Kinsley sobbing. Then a voice behind us. "Hey, what's going on over there?" Mr. Ellison, our next door neighbor. He was in his yard holding up a rake. "Help!" I shouted to him. "He's in our house." Dwayne came around the side of the fence on the road, staggering, red-faced, veins sticking out like pipework. Mr. Ellison dropped the rake and stepped forward. "You better get the hell out of here, Dwayne. I'm calling the cops." For a second, nobody moved. Then Dwayne started yelling again, throwing things, rocks, a plastic chair, anything he could get his hands on. "Go inside, kids," Mr. Ellison said. "Now." He turned back to Dwayne. "I got a gun." That did stop him. For a moment, he just stood there and glared, chest heaving. Then he spat on the grass and growled, "Tell my brother I came back for my money." He stomped over to his truck, slammed the door, and peeled away. I stood there shaking, lungs screaming. My arm still itched. My skin was crawling under the scabs. Kinsley clung to me, crying hard enough to hiccup. When I looked down at us, we were dirty, covered in chickenpox, and it honestly made me cry too. Mr. Ellison called the police from his porch, and I could still smell Dwayne in the air. Beer, motor oil, and just gross decay. I looked back at the house. The open door swung in the wind, slow and tired. There would be no fixing it, that was obvious. I remember looking at it and being scared of what my dad would say, even though I didn't do it. Still, they put me in charge, and from where I was standing, I'd failed. That was the first time that I understood that adults, that people, were the real monsters. The rest of that afternoon is still pretty blurry, but some parts burned clear as fire. The police came, Mr. Ellison had them on the phone before Dwayne even cleared the street. 2 cruisers showed up, sirens off, lights off. It made me think that they didn't even believe this was important. One cop took Kinsley and me onto a porch, while the other went inside with his hands on his gun. The house was destroyed, beer cans everywhere, drawers dumped, couch cushions gutted. My mom's dresser was overturned. It smelled like stale cigarettes and sweat. And I remember the cop shining his flashlight on the floor, licking his tongue and saying, "Jesus Christ." "All right, kids, how long was he inside for?" the other officer asked. I don't know, maybe 10 minutes, I responded. My mom got there maybe 40 minutes later, hair standing on end, still in her work uniform. Dad wasn't far behind. They ran straight to us. Mom hugged us so hard that it hurt, and Kinsley finally broke down for real this time, like ugly sobs. I remember my mom whispering that, "You're okay, baby, you're okay." I told them about everything, and so did Kinsley, through hiccups and tears. The words would come out in bursts. The shower, the truck, the beer, the screaming. Dad didn't say a thing until the cop asked if he wanted to press charges against his brother. Then his jaw locked up. The next few days kind of just dragged on. The police would come back twice. One took fingerprints off the dresser and the kitchen counter. Another asked us to tell them the story again and again. Each time it felt more distant, like it happened to somebody else. They found Dwayne's truck 2 towns over that night, parked behind a bar. He was passed out inside, still half drunk and half coherent. He spent a week in jail, got probation, and then had to go to some kind of counseling, nothing serious. And after that, we never saw him again. My mom changed the locks the same week. Dad put motion lights up on the porch and put up this heavy-duty security door. They argued in whispers every single night. And one time I heard Dad say that, "I told you he'd snap one day." My mom just cried. Kinsley wouldn't sleep alone for a month. Every creak would make her jump. I tried to act tough, but I'd wake up sweating myself, convinced that I heard his shoes or boots on the stairs again. I'd walk the hall at night, stare out that same window where she'd first seen him. And sometimes I'd imagine his truck parked there once more, tailgate down, his shadow moving amongst the trees. Now, Dwayne never came back, but that feeling never left. Even years later, when I was old enough to understand addiction and anger and how men like Dwayne rot from the inside out, I still can't shake what it felt like. The sound of him crossing our porch, the clicking of the door, the moment our house stopped being ours. It's funny how quick safety really will disappear. One second you're a kid in pajamas, eating toast and watching cartoons. The next, you're crouched behind a couch, realizing that the world cares little for you. In fact, it might not even know you exist at all. My mom mentioned to me once that Dwayne had moved out of state, somewhere near the border. She said he sobered up and he called to apologize years later, but she didn't put him on speaker and we never spoke. I don't know if it would have helped anything anyway. I'm 40-something now, married, 2 kids of my own, and I still double-check the locks every night. Still keep a bat behind the bedroom door, and I tell my kids not to open up the door for anybody, not even family. They think I'm paranoid, and maybe I am.
At 13, I used to think my sister Patricia was perfect. She was 17, popular, had a ton of friends, and had this boyfriend Jake, who everyone thought was really cool. I wanted to be like her when I got to high school. Then Jake dumped her. I heard them fighting out in the driveway. He yelled something about some Zoe having a better figure and Patricia letting herself go. She came inside crying so hard she could barely breathe. That night, she ate very little at dinner. When Mom asked if she's feeling okay, she shrugged, saying she just needs to sleep. But around midnight, I could hear her in the washroom, puking. After that, it started happening more often. Patricia would eat dinner with us, but moments later, she'll go up and puke it all out. One time I asked her if she's having any health issues. She strictly warned me to stay out of her life. I told Mom, but she said we should all give Patricia some space. The breakup had upset her, and it takes time when you are young to cope up with a heartbreak. I wish Mom took all this more seriously. One night, I was up late working on this science project I had to finish by morning. Taking a small break, I stepped downstairs to grab a snack when I heard whispers from the basement. The voice sounded like my sister's. The basement door was cracked open. I could see candlelight flickering. I pushed it and looked down the steps. Patricia was kneeling on the concrete with candles all around her in a circle. Her face looked like straight out of a horror movie. She had drawn an upside-down cross on her face with a black marker. There were weird symbols on the wall, drawn in what looked like red paint. A white bowl sat in front of her. She was eating raw meat from it. I could tell because it was shiny and wet in the candlelight, and her hands were covered in blood. "Patricia?" I whispered, horrified. Slowly she turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes were sunken way back in her skull, with these dark circles underneath. Her cheeks were hollow, and she'd gotten so skinny she didn't even look like Patricia anymore. "Matthew," she smiled, flashing the red-stained teeth. "You shouldn't be here." "What are you doing?" "What is that?" "I'm making myself perfect." She looked back at the bowl. "Fixing what's wrong with me." "What? That's raw meat. Have you totally lost it? Raw meat changes your body faster than anything else. I found these people online who only eat this, and their bodies transform in weeks." She picked up another piece and started chewing loudly. Blood dripped down her wrist. I ran back upstairs, shook Mom and Dad awake and told them everything. They went down to the basement, and I heard yelling. They dragged Patricia upstairs. She fought them the whole way, trying to get back down there. Dad had to physically carry her while she clawed at his arms and face. "Let me go! I'm not finished. I have to finish the ritual." They locked her in her bedroom. I could hear her slamming herself against the door, sobbing and begging them to let her complete it. Mom called a crisis hotline. The hotline staff advised us to bring her to the hospital first thing in the morning. I tried going back to sleep, but couldn't. Around 3 a.m., my door flew open so hard it hit the wall. Patricia stood in the doorway. She'd somehow gotten out. The light from my window caught her eyes, and they looked completely insane. "You told them," she hissed. "You ruined everything." "Patricia, listen. You're sick. You need help. I need to be perfect." She lunged at my bed, and that's when I saw the knife in her hand, one of the big ones from Mom's kitchen. "You're trying to stop me from being perfect." I threw myself off the bed just as the knife came down. It ripped through my pillow, through the sheets, and right into the mattress. "Patricia, please stop." She came at me again. I tried to block her, but the blade cut into my forearm. The pain was instant and horrible. I screamed, Blood started pouring out, running down my arm, dripping onto the carpet. "You ruined it!" She was sobbing now, raising the knife again. "They're going to send me away. I'll never finish and be good enough." The door crashed open. Dad tackled Patricia from the side. They both hit the floor hard. The knife skidded under my dresser. Mom was screaming, running to me, and pressed a cloth against my arm. Dad was trying to hold Patricia down, but she kept fighting, scratching and biting. It took 2 paramedics and a police officer to restrain her. They had to sedate her right there on my bedroom floor. Even after the shot kicked in and her body went limp, her lips kept chanting those weird words from the basement. I needed 12 stitches. The scar is thick and raised. It runs from my elbow halfway down to my wrist. Patricia's been in a psychiatric hospital for 2 months now. The doctors told us she had a complete psychotic break. The breakup triggered insecurities, and she spiraled into extreme body dysmorphia. That forum she found was a pro-anorexia site mixed with occult rituals. It was convincing vulnerable girls that starving themselves and performing these ceremonies would make them perfect. She'd been eating nothing but raw chicken and beef for weeks. The doctor said another few days, and the malnutrition or food poisoning would have killed her. Mom cries constantly. Dad barely talks anymore. I visit Patricia sometimes, but she doesn't recognize me. She just stares at the walls and whispers about perfection. Jake's still with Zoe. They post happy couple photos on Instagram like nothing happened. Like his words didn't destroy my sister's entire life. The doctors say Patricia might get better eventually, but she won't be the same person again. I'd struggled with my weight my whole life. So when I saw an ad for Peak Performance Gym promising life-changing transformations in 90 days, I signed up instantly. The gym was small, tucked in a strip mall between a nail salon and a pizza place. Nothing fancy, but it was cheap and close to my apartment. That's where I met Mark, my trainer. He was tall, fit, and had an easy vibe. During our first session, he spent an hour asking about my goals, habits, and schedules. "You're going to do great, Lila," he said, hand on my shoulder. "You showed up, and that's what matters." It felt nice having someone believe in me. The training started normal. Mark pushed me hard, but knew when to back off. He'd text every morning with motivation and meal plan reminders. Then he started checking in during the day, asking how I felt, if I'd eaten enough protein, and if I was drinking water. "You're doing amazing," his texts would say. "I'm so proud of you." After 2 weeks, I'd lost 5 pounds. After a month, 10. I was seeing results, and Mark was always there. But the compliments shifted. Great form became, "You look really good in those leggings." Nice work turned into, "You have no idea how beautiful you are." He also started training me later, when fewer people were around. "We can focus better without distractions," he said. Then, one night, he pulled out a container of pills during our session. "Special supplements," he said. "I don't give these to everyone, but you're ready for the next level. They'll speed up fat loss, boost metabolism. You'll see results twice as fast." I hesitated. "What's in them?" "It's totally herbal and safe. I take them myself," he smiled. "Trust me, Lila. When have I steered you wrong?" I took the bottle home and started taking it the way he'd told me. Mark was a professional. He cared about me. Why would he give me something bad? Within a week, I felt light, A bit jittery at times, but I really felt energized. Then, 2 nights later, I was finishing a late session. It was almost 10 p.m. and the gym was empty except for us. Mark had convinced me to stay late for one final push before your weigh-in tomorrow. "I have something new for you," he said, pulling out a purple sports drink. "Metabolism booster. You drink it before bed, it works while you sleep, burns fat overnight." "Really? But I think I'm doing just fine with those supplements you've—" "Lila." His voice went slightly cold. "Do you want results or not? I'm giving you premium supplements that cost hundreds of dollars for free. The least you can do is trust my expertise." Guilt crashed over me. He'd been so good to me, spent so much time. I was being ungrateful. "Okay, sorry. That's my girl. Drink up." I took the bottle and sipped. It tasted wrong, bitter underneath the fake grape flavor. I drank about half before my head got heavy. "Mark, I feel weird." "That's normal. Blood sugar's probably low. Come, sit down." He guided me toward the mats in the back corner, away from the windows and the front desk. My vision was blurry. The lights seemed to pulse. "Just lie back and relax," Mark said. His voice sounded far away. "We'll do some stretches. This helps the supplement absorb." I tried to sit up, but my arms felt like lead. "I think I need to go home." "Shh, it's okay. Close your eyes. I've got you." His hand was on my ankle, moving up my calf. The touch felt wrong. "Mark, stop!" "You're so tense. Just relax, Lila." I tried to push his hand away, but could barely move. My body wasn't working. I couldn't even scream. Mark was leaning closer. His hands were all over me. My eyes were nearly closed when suddenly I heard a bang, like someone had kicked a door open. There were heavy footsteps of several people. "Don't move! Step away from her now!" Everything happened fast. Mark jumped back, hands up. 2 cops rushed over. A woman from the gym was with them with her phone out. "I got it all, officer." The drink, everything he said, how he touched her. A female officer knelt next to me. "Can you hear me?" "We're getting help." The ambulance came. They ran tests and found rohypnol in the drink, the date rape drug. The supplements were dangerous stimulants that had been messing up my system for weeks. The woman who saved me was Rachel. She'd been at the gym for 3 months and noticed Mark's pattern. She'd been documenting everything and had followed me that night because she had a bad feeling. "I should have said something sooner," Rachel told me at the hospital. "I wasn't sure." Didn't want to cause trouble if I was wrong. But when I saw him pull out that drink, "You saved my life," I said. Mark got arrested that night. The investigation found 5 other women he'd assaulted over 2 years. Women who were too ashamed or scared to say anything. Women who thought they were the only ones, that maybe they misread things, that maybe they deserved it. I pressed charges. 3 of the others did too, once they knew they weren't alone. Mark got 12 years. That was 6 months ago. I still go to therapy twice a week. I work out at home now. Had to get a new phone number because I couldn't look at those old texts without feeling sick. Some nights, I still wake up tasting that purple drink, feeling his hand on my body and hearing him mumble, "Trust me." I don't know what the takeaway is supposed to be. Don't trust trainers. Don't try to be the right shape. Be paranoid about everyone. All I know is, some woman paid attention when I didn't. She noticed things I missed because I wanted so badly to believe an illusion. I don't have nightmares about what happened. I have nightmares about what almost happened. And that's worse somehow. At 23, my life was pretty ordinary. I had a decent job, good friends, and Holly, my poodle, who thought I hung the moon. I was around 200 pounds. Some days I felt fine about it, other days not so much. Then my sister got engaged and asked me to be her maid of honor. The wedding was in 6 months, and I wanted to look good in the photos, so I decided to start small. Morning walks with Holly before work. That winter morning was my third try. The first 2 times I gave up after 10 minutes, but this time felt different. The frost made everything look clean. Holly walked next to me, her leash jingling, and for the first time in a while I felt relaxed. We'd been out maybe 20 minutes when I saw some guy near an adjacent alley to the sidewalk. He was crouched by a fire in a metal drum. The flames made his face look strange and waxy. His clothes were torn and filthy, hanging off him like rags. I thought of turning around, but then shrugged it off and told myself I was being paranoid. He was probably some homeless guy trying to stay warm. My next thought was to walk past him before he noticed me. But as I took a couple of steps, he looked up. His mouth stretched into a slow, wide grin. His yellow teeth were illuminated by the firelight. "Morning," he said, voice rough and oddly cheerful. I nodded and tried to walk past quickly, pulling Holly closer. But he stood up and blocked the sidewalk. "That's a nice dog." He stepped toward us. "Real nice. What's its name?" Holly started growling low in her throat, sensing a threat. "We have to go," I said, trying to move around him. He moved with me. Then he reached for Holly. "Let me see her." "No, He grabbed Holly's leash and yanked it out of my hand. Holly yelped and tried to back away, but he pulled her toward him and then toward the fire. "Hey! Stop! What are you doing?" He laughed, this dry, rasping sound. "What a perfect meal. Gonna roast you slow and crispy. Been hungry for days." He picked Holly up by her scruff. She was snarling now, snapping at his hands. Her legs were thrashing wildly. He held her over the flames, and I could see the heat starting to singe her fur. I screamed and rushed at him. Holly twisted and bit down hard on his wrist. He dropped her, screaming in pain. I didn't think. I just kicked him in the shin as hard as I could, scooped Holly up, and ran. "You witch!" His voice echoed behind me. I heard his footsteps, heavy boots pounding the pavement. He was coming after me. "You can't outrun me, girl!" His voice was getting closer. "Look at you!" "You're already slowing down." He was right. My lungs were burning after half a block. My legs felt like they weighed a ton. Holly was shaking in my arms, whimpering. My house was 3 blocks away. I wasn't going to make it. But I kept going anyway. I had to. If I stopped, he'd take Holly and throw her in that fire. I saw a pile of construction gravel on the corner. Without thinking, I grabbed a handful of rocks and hurled them behind me. I heard him curse as one hit. It bought me maybe 5 seconds to catch my breath. 1 block down. My vision was going spotty. My chest felt like it was being crushed. But Holly's heartbeat was pounding against my ribs, and I forced my legs to keep moving. I grabbed more rocks at the next corner, threw them wild, and heard him stumble. "Come back here!" His voice was farther away now, out of breath too. I was 2 blocks down. Sweat was pouring down my face. My lungs felt like they were on fire. Every breath was a fight. I was nearly sobbing. Then I saw my building. Relief hit me so hard I almost stumbled. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my keys. But I got the door open, stumbled inside, and slammed it shut. My legs gave out, and I collapsed against it with Holly still in my arms. Through the window, I saw him stop halfway down the block. He stood there for a couple of minutes before he turned and walked away, laughing and skipping like it had all been some sick game. I sat on my floor for an hour holding Holly and crying. Called the cops, but they said without injuries or a better description they couldn't do much. They told me to be careful walking alone. That should have ended it. Should have sent me straight back to hiding in my apartment. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That guy was right. I was slow. I struggled. But I still outran him when it mattered most. And I realized something that morning. I didn't need to lose weight to look good in wedding photos. I needed to be strong enough to protect myself and those who mattered. So I kept walking. I also joined a kickboxing basics class at the gym near my work. It's brutal. I pant after 5 minutes. Sometimes I get so dizzy I have to sit down. Once, I actually passed out during warm-ups and woke up to the instructor fanning me with a towel. But you know what? I'd rather pass out in a gym surrounded by people than on a street where some psycho can grab my dog or do worse to me. I carry pepper spray too, just in case, and take different routes. I'm learning how to throw a proper punch and how to use my weight as an advantage instead of a weakness. My sister's wedding is in 2 weeks. My transformation ain't miraculous. I probably won't look that different in the photos, but I can run 3 blocks without stopping now. I can throw a decent hook. I can defend myself. And yeah, I still have bad days. Days when I'm exhausted and sore and wondering why I'm putting myself through this. But then I look at Holly, alive and safe, curled up on my couch, and I remember that my body worked when I wanted it to. It saved something I love.
I'll be the first to admit that this all could have taken place in my head. The mind is a freaky thing and can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad always told me that in life, you should not be afraid of ghosts. Fear the living, because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that time period, the cabin was not going to be rented out and would be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed to the cabin in my dad's car, which he left me in his will. Now this is our family cabin that my parents rented out when they weren't using it. I had the keys to the cabin, and also had the code for the alarms. So I didn't feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them on my stay. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and played PlayStation and listened to music during the evenings. I also did some drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much shut in, aside from the occasional outing to hit the slopes. With my dog as company, and DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room, a guest bedroom, along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent in the living room, the kitchen, or the master bedroom. I had no reason to venture to the other rooms, and I always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creeped me out. Anyhow, the third day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name is Midnight, by the way, and he has also since passed. I then played some video games and watched some movies. That day was forecasted for pretty heavy snowfall, so I didn't feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car, and decided to stay in. This is where things begin to get a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were over a mile away. Surrounding us was a forest of very tall pine trees. This particular detail will be important later on. From the past couple of days, I knew that both of these cabins were empty. I think I've given enough background. Now I'm going to jump into the strangeness. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked somewhat fresh, like someone had been here in the last 20 to 30 minutes. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me, and I may not have noticed. Perhaps they were shut-ins like me. Whatever. The footprints led away from the cabin and disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I didn't think much of it and went back inside. Nighttime came around, and I decided to head off to bed. Midnight was lying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent. I was kind of freaked out. I could hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs and started to do his doggy dance, which was his way of telling me that he had to go pee. Shit. Well, fine. I couldn't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway so he could do his business. The only thing is, he didn't have to go. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull his leash, trying to drag me off somewhere. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the footprints had been earlier. He also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up to the roof. After he figured out that he was not going to go where he wanted to, he sat himself down and just stared into the dark, which was a bit unusual for him. Perhaps there was an animal somewhere out there in the forest he wanted to chase down, but fuck that. I didn't want to chance anything. So I pulled him back inside, and we both went back upstairs. Around 30 minutes later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. I tried to rationalize that it could have been a pine cone falling from a tree, or maybe a harmless critter from the forest was running around up there. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart, at a length too wide to be a small animal, or even a man. You notice things like that when you're in an isolated setting like this. It was really getting under my skin. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and my shoes, along with my cigarettes and flashlight, and went out to the balcony. As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my flashlight. Nothing was there, and the snow on top looked undisturbed. Must have all just been in my head, right? But what about Midnight hearing the noise as well? Maybe he was feeding off my fear and paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. I turned off the flashlight and allowed my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I was just staring at the forest next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a bit taller than our cabin, and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position between two branches. He looked very tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, and was extremely thin. It was squatted on one branch, and its abnormally long, white arms were extended above its head, holding on to another branch above it. Its mouth was wide open, with no expression. What the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing or not, and I stood there just staring, motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and started pacing behind me, lightly barking at the same time. Still, the thing did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head told me that that was not a good idea. So I carefully backed up to inside the room, called Midnight back in, and shut the door. Once I locked up, I shined the light in the thing's direction, but nothing was there. I then closed the curtains and retreated back to bed. Later on in the night, I heard some light tapping at the screen door, like someone was strumming on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but wouldn't go anywhere near it. The strangest part was I had the feeling like something was inviting me to open the door. But at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice inside my head, telling me to stay where I was. I eventually passed out. When I woke up the next morning, it didn't take me long to pack everything up and get the hell out of there. In 1984, when I was 8 years old, my family moved to Allenstown, New Hampshire. Our house sat at the end of a dirt road near Bear Brook State Park. In front of our house was an open field that had small tree patches here and there. After what I estimate to be about 50 yards, the field ended and the forest began. One day, my friend and I wanted to go exploring further than we had before. We were very familiar with the first acre or two of forest we usually roamed around in, and wanted to cover some new ground that day. Shortly after passing the usual landmarks, we came upon a dirt ridge. Beyond that, we saw a clearing with a row of 4 cabins. The area included a shallow pond, a dense wall of trees on either side, patches of bushes between the cabins, and a few cars that looked like they had been torched. The cabins had that typical lined wood look with flat rooftops. When we first discovered this place, we thought it was an abandoned resort or something. However, when we peered through the windows, most of the cabins contained furniture and beds. There was no one in sight. I remember feeling creeped out as we moved from cabin to cabin, and I would soon discover why. Behind one of the cabins was a dirt bed with half-buried animal bones scattered across it. If these remains were from hunting, surely they wouldn't want vultures buzzing around their resort. I thought it was odd, but not too alarming. My mom always told me to stay away from dead animals because they could be carrying some kind of disease, so we didn't feel the need to go poking around the pet cemetery, and soon left. Curiosity got the better of us, and we returned a week later. During our second visit, I noted how odd it was that there were no signs or markers indicating who owned this property, or if it was a private campsite. There were also no roads leading there. This time, it felt like we were being watched, though I didn't see anyone at first. As we prepared to leave, a tall man wearing a dark jacket emerged from the trees and ran toward us. He was about 100 meters away, with a rifle slung over his back. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he shouted. My friend and I started running away. The man followed us, unslinging his rifle and shouldering it as if he meant to fire at us. We climbed over the dirt ridge and ran without stopping until we got back to my house. We never told my parents or anyone else about the incident. We didn't want to be restricted on future explorations, but I don't remember ever going back there. What happened to us could be chalked up to a couple of kids trespassing on private property. But a year later, hunters found a 55-gallon metal drum in a wooded area close to where those cabins were. Inside were the bodies of a woman and a young girl. At the time, the victims were not identified, and the case remained unsolved. That was until 15 years later, when a second drum was discovered containing the bodies of 2 more girls, about 100 yards away from where the first one was found. One of the victims was only 11 months old. DNA testing later linked the victims to a serial killer named Terry Rasmussen. I never got a good look at the man who chased us away from the cabins that day, so I can't say for sure if it was him or not. But when I think back to that place, I think about how some people say that they never found all of Terry's victims, and I always remember those bones we saw scattered about. I honestly don't think 8-year-old me could tell the difference between animal and human bones. I heard a story on your channel about the 1977 Oklahoma Girl Scout murders, and it brought to the surface a story from my own family's history. These events happened before I was born. Had things played out differently, I wouldn't be here today. The year was 1981. The Ketty Resort was a sleepy getaway nestled in the mountains of Northern California. It was the kind of place folks went to fish, drink, and forget about their troubles for a while. My family was staying at Cabin 28. My grandmother Sue, her 5 children, and a couple of their friends. They were just enjoying their stay and doing the typical things you would do at a cabin in the woods. They were completely unaware that something evil was making its way through the trees toward the resort and to Cabin 28. No one knows exactly what took place on the night of April 11th, 1981, but it was theorized that someone, possibly more than one person, knocked on the cabin door between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Investigators believed that the individuals were known to my grandmother, and she allowed them to enter the cabin. Once inside, the assailants attacked. There was a struggle. Sue, my Uncle John, 15, and his friend Dana, 17, were bound with wire, then struck and stabbed multiple times with a hammer and knife. The following morning, around 8 a.m., one of the daughters returned from a sleepover at her friend's cabin and discovered the bodies in the living room. She screamed and ran to the neighbors for help. Once the police arrived, it was discovered that one of the children was missing. It was my Aunt Tina, who was only 12 at the time. Her remains would be found 3 years later. It's possible she witnessed what took place in the living room that night and was abducted and later murdered in cold blood. Due to a botched investigation, no arrests were ever made, and the murders remained unsolved to this day. Bear in mind that there is much more to this story, and many questions surrounding this case have never been answered. I've summarized things a bit because these are my family members we're talking about, and I can't bring myself to go into further detail about their horrifying deaths. I will tell you that the girl who discovered the bodies the morning after is my mother, Sheila Sharp. People that I've shared this story with have made comparisons to the Friday the 13th movies, and I can definitely see why. However, I think most horror movie fans view Jason Voorhees as cool or badass, but I don't share their enthusiasm. Jason Voorhees is a fictional character, but the influences that created him are very real. In my case, it's hard for me to separate fiction from reality. I can't watch those films and not think about how all those deaths would affect so many families, like they did mine.
I'm a father of 4, and man, do I have a story to tell you. My wife and I both own a logging company outside of Charlottesville, Virginia, and primarily make our income through there. The business didn't start off great, but over time it improved significantly. My kids are both in middle school and are the best things I could ever ask for. My daughter is the youngest, while my son was just a year older than her. Back in the summer of 2019, we had taken a family camping trip down to the Carolinas as the highlight of our summer vacation. We had PTO, the kids were on summer break, it worked out perfectly. We had gone out to this really popular family campground in North Carolina, which was the ideal spot for the family. I helped my kids build their tent while my wife built ours we'd be staying in. Now, this campground isn't just some small area of the woods with a few small buildings. This place was huge, and you were pretty much allowed to set up your camp however far out you wanted. After we all got situated, my wife tells us that we should all go down to the dining hall for some dinner and dessert. With there being some buildings like the dining hall and a visitor center, it wasn't a real camping trip, but it was still fun for the family. We ate what food staff was serving along with maybe 3 or 4 other families also camping here. After dinner, we walked about 20 minutes before we went back to our campsite to get some sleep as we had planned on going fishing in the morning. I made sure my kids were asleep in their tent by 9 while my wife and I just read our books in our tent until we got tired. After a bit, we sort of drifted off to sleep and I'd say I slept for a good few hours or so. Now, let's fast forward to maybe a couple hours later. It was well into the night when I for some reason had this really weird dream/feeling. There's no real way to describe it without sounding morbid, but I was dreaming about my head being pinned with something sharp. Nobody in this dream was there but me, and the only thing I could really describe about it was the pain on my head. This went on for a good few minutes before I started to slowly wake up when I realized that the sharp pain persisted. I remember feeling around the top of my head only to find that it was also wet along with a low noise coming from behind me. Right then, my wife wakes up and screams her lungs out, spitting out the words to go away. I turn around and there, standing right in front of the tent opening, is a red fox in its defensive position. It growls at us before my wife manages to scare it away with her shoe. Turns out, that pain I was feeling was a damn fox clamping at the back of my head. And the reason why my head felt wet was because of the blood running down. At this point, my kids were wide awake crying when they realized what was happening. Right then, I began to feel sudden dizziness before almost falling to the ground. My wife had called the front desk of the campground and they had sent their medical team or whatever before rushing me to a hospital. After a couple of days, I did make it through and obviously recovered. Turns out though, we had set up our tents in a spot right next to a fox's nest that we didn't see. The fox probably mistakenly saw us as a threat to her and her cubs and did anything to protect them. It's been years now, and I am fully recovered. It's just crazy to think that my dream turned into a reality.
The story happened roughly 15 years ago, and I just had to share it. Now that the company is dissolved, I shouldn't get into any trouble for sharing. I used to work for a company that built cars. I won't name the brand name or its location for privacy reasons. I worked in the finishing 2 department. Now, it's important to know the layout of our department. In our department, the actual frame of the car would be brought through on a massive assembly line. We had 3 lines in our department each for a different make of vehicle. There were 2 high pots on each line. These high pots were massive, probably the size of a pole barn and basically a building within the building. The first high pot on each line was a giant washer that would spray the unpainted frame down with silica, which is a very toxic chemical many factories use at a boiling 500 degrees Fahrenheit. This was done to clean off any impurities in the frame, and the silica made the paint stick to the frame better. After leaving the first high pot, it would go to the second one where the frame was dunked, flipped over, dragged, and pulled out of the giant pool of paint by a robot, and then sent down the line after going through the dryer. Anyway, these high pots have certain safety features on them. One being if you open a door while it's running, it trips the e-stop and sets off the alarms. However, the machine has to be stopped from the outside before the doors to it will unlock, and there's no stop button inside them. This will be important later. Anyway, we had this supervisor named Christy, and let me tell you, she was a bitch. Christy was a redhead in her 30s who didn't really care about anything. I literally heard her tell someone, "Look, I don't care if you have a heart attack and die." Yeah, she's that kind of person. She didn't really bother me too much. However, there was one employee over at the other high pot line that she had it out for. Armando. Armando was a Mexican guy in his 40s who had apparently immigrated to the United States only 4 years prior. He had been working there for roughly 1 year at this point. He was quiet, but he did a good job. Christy wouldn't leave him alone though, and whenever she thought nobody was listening, she would walk by him and just make really awful comments. One day I heard her walk by him and make an awful joke that I won't even repeat here. Little did she know this would set Armando over the edge. Later that day, I was running my line when I heard the alarms for the high pot washer on Armando's line go off. It probably just faulted out again, which actually happens regularly to all of our equipment. I didn't think much of it and just went back to my own line. 10 minutes later, I hear the alarms go off again, this time in a different tone, signaling the high pot is starting up. Then I hear screaming. Christy's muffled screaming. I look over and I see Christy in one of those plexiglass windows of the high pot washer screaming and banging on the door as the hot silica is being sprayed on her. I then look over to Armando and I'm expecting him to hit the e-stop or do something. But he doesn't. He just stands there watching with his arms crossed. I quickly run over the walkovers that cross over the conveyors. I have to cross 3 of those to get in his line, which takes about 1 minute. I run over to the control panel and press the e-stop, which unlocks all the doors on the high pot washer and sets off the alarms as well. Christy stumbles out of the access door to the high pot, and I'll never forget the horrifying scene of flesh melting away from her bones and blood beginning to ooze out that awaited me. Eventually, paramedics arrived and Christy was taken away, and Armando was taken away in handcuffs by the police. Apparently what happened is Armando stopped the washer and then just walked away. When Christy noticed it was down, she came over to investigate, and then went inside it as well when she didn't see Armando around. Armando then shut the door behind her and locked it and then started it back up again, spraying her to death with scalding hot silica. Apparently he was so sick of her harassment, and apparently HR had done nothing about it, that he just finally snapped. Armando was actually sentenced to life in prison for this, and Christy ended up dying from her injuries. OSHA began an investigation. However, the company went bankrupt 2 years later before the investigation was even finished, and the building was eventually demolished. I still think about that to this day, and I can't imagine a more horrifying way to die. My name is Reed and I'm a 25-year-old male. This is about the time I had a stalker at my job at a restaurant where I worked as a bartender. I never thought much about the people I worked with at the restaurant. It was just a job, something to pay the bills while I figured out the rest of my life. I bartended every night, working the late shift. Most of the customers were regulars. Old faces, late-night drunks, the occasional couple on a date. Nothing ever really stood out. That is, until I met her. Her name was Clara. She started about 3 weeks after I did, filling in for shifts when we got slammed. She wasn't anything special at first, just another person trying to get by. Tall, dark hair, a little too much makeup for the job. I never paid her much attention, just another face behind the counter. But there was something about her that just started to feel off. It was little things at first, like how she always stood just a little too close when we talked, or how she'd smile just a bit too long when she handed me an order. I didn't think much of it. I just chalked it up to her being new, maybe a little nervous around me or the job. But then it kept happening. She'd linger around the bar when it wasn't her shift, watching me work, asking if I needed help when I clearly didn't. She'd comment on how I made drinks or how I interacted with the customers, even though she wasn't exactly an expert herself. I caught her looking at me from across the room, her gaze lingering just a little too long. At first, I figured I was just imagining it, but after a few nights, I started to feel more like she was studying me. One evening, I was wiping down the bar after the last call when she came over. She had this tight smile on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're really good at what you do," she said, her voice soft but not exactly casual. "You've got this ease about you." I smiled back, kind of unsure on how to respond. "Thanks, I've been at it for a while." She nodded, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of the bar almost absent-mindedly. Then she said, "Maybe we could hang out sometime. Outside of this place." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't rude, but I wasn't interested either. "I don't really think that'd be a good idea," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. "I'm actually pretty busy outside of work." Her face faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, no worries. Just thought I'd ask." The next night, she had handed me a folded piece of paper when no one else was looking. She smiled like it was some kind of secret. "Just in case you change your mind," she said softly. "I'd like to spend more time with you." I opened the paper after she left. It was a phone number. I wasn't really sure what to make of it. I didn't want to be rude, so I pocketed it, figuring I could just ignore it if it came to that. But the whole interaction left a weird feeling in my stomach. Something didn't feel right. The following week, Clara's behavior escalated. She started showing up at the bar on nights when she wasn't scheduled to work. I'd be mixing drinks, and there she was, sitting at the counter with her usual drink, just watching me. At first, I thought she was just a regular customer, but then I noticed how she'd order the same thing every night, sip it slowly, and watch me work as if she was analyzing every little thing I did. I'd catch her staring at me when I wasn't looking, and when I didn't look up, she'd quickly glance away like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't have. The worst part was how she never seemed to talk to anyone else. She'd just sit there waiting for a moment when I wasn't busy to talk to me. I started to feel trapped, like I was walking a tightrope, unsure when she'd cross the line between friendly and, well, something else. One night after the bar had slowed down, I was wiping down the counter when she slid into the seat right in front of me. "Reed," she said softly, almost like she was telling me a secret. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." I froze, the rag in my hand pausing mid-air. I tried to laugh it off. "Well, it's not like we don't see each other enough here." She didn't smile. "No, I really think we have something special. You're not like the other guys. You don't just see me as a bartender. You see me." I wasn't sure what to say to that. I didn't feel any special connection whatsoever. Nothing like that anyways. "I don't know what you mean, Clara." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the bar toward me. "It's for you. Just a little something. I hesitated, then took it. Inside was a card, a personal one. The kind you give someone you had a history with, not someone you just met. The note was simple but chilling. We're meant to be together, Reed. I know you feel it too. I felt my stomach drop. My thoughts raced, but before I could say anything, she stood up and left, leaving me with that feeling of unease deep in my bones. That's when it started. The weird notes, the unexpected visits to my apartment, the awkward forced interactions where I'd try to be polite, but she just wouldn't take the hint. She started to follow me after work, waiting outside the restaurant sometimes, watching me walk to my car. She'd smile and wave, but I'd get into my car as quickly as I could, my hands shaking on the wheel. I couldn't take it anymore. One night after I got off late, I found a note on my windshield. I know where you live, Reed. I'll be there soon. I went cold. I didn't know how she found out where I lived, but I couldn't ignore it. This wasn't some harmless crush anymore. She was stalking me. I had to talk to my manager. I told him everything. How Clara was making me uncomfortable. How I was scared to come to work. How I was feeling trapped by her constant presence. He listened, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. It was hard for him to believe me at first. But when I showed him the note on my windshield, his face dropped. The next day, Clara was fired. I'd heard from the other staff that she had been let go for unprofessional behavior. They didn't go into details, but I knew it was more than that. I wasn't the only one she had been bothering. Apparently, she'd been sending strange texts to a few other coworkers too, but I didn't find that out until later. My manager called me into his office after her firing. He seemed genuinely sorry about what had happened. I know it's been rough, he said, and I just want you to know if you ever want your job back, it's yours. But I didn't want to come back. I couldn't. I didn't feel safe there anymore. Not after everything that happened. The restaurant had been my escape, my routine, but it had turned into a place of anxiety. A place where I constantly looked over my shoulder. No amount of money was worth the constant fear I'd felt. I appreciate the offer, I told him, but I can't come back. It's just too much. I walked away from that job and I never looked back. It wasn't easy. Money was tight for a while, but I eventually found something else, something safer, quieter. But even now, there are moments when I'm walking down the street at night and I feel like I'm being watched. I'm always on edge, always checking over my shoulder. I don't know where Clara is now, or if she's even still out there. Maybe she's moved on to someone else. But I've learned that some things just stay with you even after they're gone. And for me, the worst part isn't even the fear anymore. It's the question that keeps me up some nights. What if she's still out there, waiting for me to slip up again? But that's a problem for someone else now. For me, well, I'm done. It was July 2011. I had just turned 21 and was living in the Piedmont region of North Carolina. Dating apps were still in their infancy, and I found myself gravitating towards Craigslist personals. It was raw, anonymous, and wide open, each post a gamble. Users would write short ads with vague descriptions. Sometimes they included a blurry photo. Most of the time, it was just a few bold sentences dangling mystery and danger. Young and naive, I wasn't looking for love, just a quick, exciting connection. I responded to one listing that immediately caught my eye. A woman replied almost instantly, which both surprised and excited me. Our chat started off innocent enough. Greetings, interests, light flirting. But soon, we were diving into fantasies of what we might do if we met. It was PG-13, at least for that era, and I was buzzing with adrenaline. After about 30 minutes, she asked for a picture. I sent her a selfie and requested one in return. What I received was a woman who looked to be in her mid-40s. She had shoulder-length blonde hair, hazel eyes, a warm smile, and breasts that seemed designed to scramble in the mind of a 21-year-old boy. Her body wasn't toned, but she appeared healthy, normal, like someone's attractive suburban mom. I was hooked. Then she asked, "Are you generous?" I didn't know what she meant. Generous how? Time, compliments? But I didn't want to sound dumb and risk ruining the moment. So I answered, "Of course I am." She then responded with, "Perfect," then gave me her address. She lived about 30 minutes away from me. I told her I'd head out right away. She replied, "Great, I'll get ready for you." The drive was a cocktail of excitement and nerves. I couldn't believe my luck. The idea that a woman like her wanted to meet me, just some skinny guy from the area, felt so surreal. But the closer I got, the quicker my confidence evaporated. The houses grew more run down, the yards cluttered with discarded furniture and trash bags. Streetlights flickered over cracked sidewalks and shuttered windows. I told myself not to judge her by where she lived. People fall on hard times, right? Still, the butterflies in my stomach started swarming into something darker. I arrived at a 2-story house. It wasn't as dilapidated as the others, which gave me a sliver of hope. I surveyed my surroundings carefully, marking anything that felt off. The street was quiet, no voices, no movement. Just the hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark from a dog down the block. Before getting out, I hid all of my belongings in the car so there'd be nothing tempting to steal. I carried only my phone and more shoes I could run in just in case. I climbed the steps and knocked. A woman's voice answered from inside. "Come in." The door creaked as I entered, and my senses were immediately assaulted. The inside was absolute chaos. Newspapers stacked to the ceiling, crusty takeout containers balanced on shelves, boxes stuffed with random junk, and cereal spilling all across the floor. The smell wasn't overpowering, but carried the unmistakable scent of decay. Straight ahead was a staircase leading to the second floor. To the left, a living room bathed in flashing TV light. A tall man sat on the couch, arms stretched across the backrest, staring at the screen like he was waiting for something. Or someone. A chill ran through me. Who was he? Why didn't she mention anyone else being here? I called out, "Hey, where are you?" Her voice answered again, soft and sultry, this time from a room down the hallway. The man never once turned or spoke, just kept watching the screen like a silent gatekeeper. I moved cautiously, weaving through the towers of trash and grime. The hallway narrowed with debris, and the air grew heavier with each step. I peeked into the doorway and just froze. There she was, but she wasn't the woman from the photos. This woman was large, massive even. Her greasy brown hair hung limp, and the top of her scalp was patchy. Her face bore uneven makeup, with a few prominent moles barely masked. When she smiled, I only saw a handful of teeth behind streaks of red lipstick. She sat on what I assumed was a queen-size mattress, though most of it was buried under the trash. Her breasts barely sat inside a sheer-stained nightgown. They hung to her knees as she sat wide-legged, motioning for me to come closer. But what truly turned my stomach wasn't her appearance. It was the environment. The bed she sat on looked molded, collapsing beneath her weight. Roaches scurried out from the mounds of trash she shifted to make space. The room was a biohazard. She gestured for me to sit beside her. I took one hesitant step in, still unsure how to exit without escalating things. She asked, "What would you like to see, dear?" while fondling herself. Then she said, "So, how generous are you going to be tonight?" Confused, I asked, what do you mean exactly?" She giggled. "How generous are you going to be with your payment?" Suddenly, it clicked. Generous was code. This wasn't a hookup. This was a transaction. I began backing out of the room, apologizing profusely. I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I didn't know this was that kind of arrangement. I was halfway down the hallway when the man from the couch stood up, now blocking the door. I felt the walls closing in. He was huge, easily 6'8", broad and unmoving. Behind me, the woman stormed into the doorway. You wasted my time and you're not even going to pay for it? She hissed. The man crossed his arms and spoke in a voice like steel. It's either you pay for the time you wasted or I'll take the payment from you, little man. Fear pulsed in my chest. I was alone in a strange house, cornered. I had no backup, but then I thought of a way out. I stood tall. Well, as tall as a 5'5" guy could at 120 pounds. I then said, if you really think I came out here without telling someone where I'm going, you're absolutely stupid. I told my friend before I left to expect a call within 45 minutes. If they don't hear from me, they're calling the cops. He squinted at me. You're bluffing. You sure you want to take that gamble? I said, pointing toward the window. Because I smelled weed from the sidewalk, and the cops will too. You let me walk out right now and I'll forget this ever happened. But if you make this hard, you'll have 2 squad cars parked here in less than 10. Dead silence followed. Then the man turned to her and shrugged. Look, this one's not worth it. Don't you have someone else coming later on? She nodded, and without another word, the man stepped aside. I didn't wait. I walked out that door calmly, controlled, never turning back, never saying a word. I got in my car and drove off. The moment I was out of sight, I screamed. Relief, shock, anger. I was lucky, and I never went on Craigslist again. So picture this. It's about 4 in the morning. One of those cold, damp London weekdays where the air feels heavy and clings to you. I'd fallen down a video game rabbit hole, surfaced hours later, and I realized 2 things. 1, it was obscenely late, and 2, I'd completely forgotten to eat dinner. A quick, desperate scan of the kitchen confirmed the worst. Nothing. Damn it. My only hope was the 24-hour McDonald's drive-thru down the road. It's maybe a 10-minute walk, mostly through quiet suburban streets that feel almost unnervingly still at that hour. Coat on, I headed into the pre-dawn gloom. Habit took over, and I immediately stuck in my earphones, scrolling through my phone to catch up on the messages and notifications I'd blissfully ignored for the past several hours. In hindsight, I know exactly how that looks. Headphones in, face lit by a phone screen, completely oblivious to the world at 4 a.m. Prime target material, basically. I was about halfway there when I had registered movement just behind me. I glanced back. There was a guy swallowed by an oversized hoodie riding a bicycle. Except it wasn't a normal bike. It was painfully obviously a child's pink bicycle. The tiny frame looked ridiculous underneath him. He wasn't going anywhere specific, just doing slow wide loops on the empty street, always ending up slightly behind me. Now, I've lived in London for about 3 years. You see weird stuff. It's part of the background noise. My default programming kicked in. Head down, keep walking. Don't make eye contact. He'll get bored eventually. You know, standard operating procedure for navigating the city's low-level strangeness. But then he wasn't behind me anymore. He smoothly cycled up right alongside me, matching my pace. The ignore it strategy suddenly felt very thin. He was muttering something. It was clear he wanted my attention. Reluctantly, I pulled out one earbud, still walking, trying for casual indifference. My automatic defense mechanism fired off before I even properly heard him. I'm sorry, I don't have any change. That's when I made the mistake of actually looking at him. He wasn't asking for change. His eyes locked onto mine, and there was a hard, focused intensity there that immediately set off alarm bells. My gaze flickered down. His right hand was shoved deep into the front pocket of his hoodie, pushing the fabric outwards. Oh, it wasn't a slow dawning realization, more like a sudden plunge into ice water. The casual weirdness evaporated, replaced by cold, sharp-edged fear. That's when I properly registered his words, spoken low but clear. "Give me your phone." My feet kept moving, seemingly on autopilot, but the rest of me felt frozen. My brain felt like it was buffering, trying to process the demand against the very real possibility of what was in that pocket. Is he bluffing? Is that a knife? Is this phone I literally just got and definitely can't afford to replace, worth getting stabbed over? The mental calculus was frantic and terrifying. We were still moving forward side by side in this bizarre, terrifying mobile standoff. Me staring straight ahead, hyper aware of him right beside me, and my mind racing. And then a sound. The distinct rumble of a car engine growing louder. Headlights swept across the end of the street, illuminating the junction just yards ahead. A brief moment of blinding light. I shot a look back at the guy on the tiny pink bike. The thought flashed. Run! Make a break for the car, for the light. But before the thought could even translate into action, he abruptly swerved. He pushed off hard on the tiny pedals, cycling rapidly down the street, disappearing back into the shadows as quickly as he'd appeared. I just stood there for a second, heart hammering against my ribs. Then the next thought hit me. Crap, I still have to walk home. Needless to say, the McDonald's craving vanished instantly. On the way back, the headphones stayed off, and my phone stayed deep in my pocket, clutched in my hand. I also gave the quiet suburban streets a wide berth. Instead, I took the long way round, sticking to the main A road. It's noisy, choked with fumes even at this hour, and the pavement is basically a narrow, neglected strip inches away from speeding traffic. It felt horrible, but infinitely safer. The constant stream of headlights, the drone of engines. It was unpleasant, but it was a presence. Company of a sort. Thankfully, the rest of the walk was uneventful. No more unexpected cyclists emerged from the dark. But yeah, I'm just really glad that it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Guy on a tiny pink bike at 4 a.m. demanding my phone. Hopefully I don't ever encounter you again.
When I was 13 and in middle school, my class went to this one wildlife place. It was the first field trip of the year, so it was still very warm outside and there was pretty nice weather. We boarded the bus from school and it took us to this park that had lots of trails. There was also a lot of different types of plants and flowers, which is part of what we were there for. They also had a building and some tour guides who talked to us for a while. I don't remember a ton of details because it was a really long time ago, but I do know that at one point we went outside towards some of the trails. The tour guide was speaking, but taking forever to move from one place to another. We were sort of allowed to walk around and go on our own, but we were supposed to stay in the general area. There were a ton of kids though, so I remember that my friend Austin and I kind of wandered off together. Austin and I were pretty good friends, and we would talk all the time during class. I remember that we went down this trail and it kind of went around the corner. Austin and I just sort of kept walking and we were talking to each other. Before we knew it, we were a long ways from the rest of the class and we were pretty deep into the woods. I didn't really think much of it though, and we just continued to walk down the trail. Eventually, the trail got more and more narrow and the woods became more dense. When we got to that part, both of us heard a noise and some movement coming from deeper in the woods off the trail. We couldn't see where it was coming from exactly, but we decided to go closer, being the curious kids that we were. I think that we were both thinking and expecting it to maybe be some kind of an animal. I know I was. However, after we went off the trail and made it through the trees, we reached a small clearing. Inside that clearing there were these two guys standing by a tree and smoking. I'm not sure what exactly they were smoking, but the guys looked to maybe be in their late teens or so. Austin and I figured that they went into the woods to do drugs and so they wouldn't be seen, so we quickly turned around. The guys did not say anything, and we kept going down the path farther away from our class. We probably should have just gone back right then and there, and I'm not really sure why we didn't. but nevertheless, we continued to go down the path for some time. We talked, and basically we were just bored and wandering around. After like 10 minutes, we reached what was pretty much a dead end. The path made it to this marshland, and there was no bridge or anything. We walked along the edge of it for a while. As we were doing that, we started to hear footsteps behind us on the path. However, they were around a corner in a location that we could not see. They were also pretty far back. The footsteps sort of stopped though. Then, moments later, a rock flew towards us from around the corner. I didn't see at first where it had come from exactly, but a few moments later, I saw somebody come around the corner for just a second and throw another rock. That one went flying towards us and just barely missed. It looked like the guys we had seen who had been smoking. They were now throwing rocks at us. Moments later, the other guy came out and tossed a rock. This throw was much better and got even closer. Austin and I didn't want to wait around any longer. We turned and started running along the marshland. Then we turned and cut through the thick woods, not even going on the path. We knew the basic way to get back to the main area, so we were trying to get there by any means. After running for a while, we soon heard footsteps a ways behind us. I figured that the two guys were chasing us. They were a long ways back, but it made us go even faster. We kept running until we stopped hearing the footsteps. Eventually, we found a path again. Then we continued to lightly jog until we had made it back to the class. They had only moved like 30 feet, and one of the guides was still speaking. I don't think anybody even knew that we had left. I'm not sure who those guys were that we saw, but they seemed to have bad intentions. Maybe they were mad that we saw them doing drugs, or maybe they thought it was just a joke. Either way, I'm glad that we got away from them. One time back when I was in high school, one of my classes went on a field trip to a history museum. It was a history class and there were about 30 kids in it. One of those kids in particular was a guy who I really didn't like at all, and he didn't like me either. For this story, I'm just going to call him John. So John was always kind of a jerk. He was a bully and a troublemaker. When he was in class, he would always sit in the back and usually sleep for the whole hour, or secretly vape by sticking his head in his shirt. During my freshman year, I had to be his partner on a class project, and he was rude to me and unfair the whole time. That's kind of what led to us being sort of enemies, and for some reason, we always seemed to have classes together. In this history class, I would just try to avoid him. I know that he had gotten suspended at one point for actually punching another kid in the school. I didn't think that it was worth my time to fight him though. I was a member of the high school baseball team and I didn't want to get in trouble. John wasn't involved in any activities, so he had nothing to lose, I guess. Anyways, we went on this field trip to the history museum. There were lots of exhibits and things to look at. It was pretty much what you would expect from a history museum, and at one point we were free to roam around the museum how we wanted to. So I remember that there was this one exhibit in particular of like an old town. There was a glass wall with railing a little more than waist high. I was looking at the town and sort of leaning over to see better because it was a very cool exhibit. It was kind of like those train cities that people build, but this was of an old-fashioned town, so there was a lot of things to look at. I remember that in the middle of this, all of a sudden, I felt someone sort of grab me from behind and push me over. As I was falling, I saw that it was John who had pushed me. I fell over the railing and right next to the city. By extreme luck, I didn't break anything. I had mostly landed next to the city. However, I knocked over a few of the buildings and stuff on the edge of it, but mostly things were fine. When I looked up, John was far off, like 15 feet away now, and sort of laughing. As I started to get up, I saw that everyone in the room was now looking at me. It was very embarrassing. The lady who worked at the museum got mad and started to yell at me. I started to pick up the things that fell over and was told to stop and not touch anything. She told me to get out of there, so I did. The lady seemed to not see that I had been pushed, and it appeared as though she had the impression that I had just jumped in to be funny or something. She scolded me and I told her that I had been pushed, but for some reason she didn't seem to believe me. I looked over to John and said that he had pushed me over. By now, John was on the complete other side of the room and he was walking away even farther. I was so mad and I went over to find John, but by that point he had left the room. I found another kid who I knew and I told him how John had pushed me over. The kid said that he didn't see it, but at least he seemed to actually believe me. Apparently nobody else in the room had seen me get pushed and didn't really know what had happened. As the day went on at the History Museum, I didn't see John for almost the entire rest of the time. I was kind of glad that I didn't see him, but I also wanted to give him a piece of my mind. So finally, when the field trip was over and we were about to leave, I saw John again. By that time, I had cooled down, and I decided to just ignore him and not confront him or anything. So we all boarded the bus back and went back to school. When we arrived back, it was just in time for our final classes of the day. I remember that I got to my class, which was some type of a science class, I think. I sat next to one of my good friends, and when I got there, he asked me about the field trip. Then he showed me this Snapchat story that he had seen. It was a story that John had posted on his Snapchat. I hadn't seen it because I wasn't friends with John on Snapchat. Anyways, the post was of him sitting in the back of the bus, taking a selfie holding this old hat that he had stolen from the museum. The hat was in one of the exhibits, I remember, because one of the tour guides told a story about how it's really old and authentic. I couldn't believe that John had stolen it, but it also didn't surprise me knowing him. I talked with my friend about how John had pushed me into the exhibit and stuff. The next day at history class, our teacher had found out that somebody had stole the hat, but he didn't know who. Apparently nobody else knew who did it either, besides me. When class started, our teacher told us how the museum told him somebody stole the hat, and they didn't know who. Our teacher then said that somebody had to step up and confess, but everyone was silent. Of course, I wasn't going to rat out John in front of everyone. I was planning to after class though. After the teacher's speech, we resumed, and unfortunately in the long class period, I forgot about telling the teacher how John had stolen it. I just moved on with my day and went to my next class. I'm not sure how many people had John on Snapchat, if anybody in the class even did at all. So I remember that later on in the school day, I was at my locker putting my books away. Some other kid who I barely knew started calling my name. He was like halfway down the hall, and I knew who he was, but we were not friends. I had no idea why he was calling me, so I walked over to him. When I got there, he brought up how I had taken a spill at the museum, and he started laughing about it. I told him that John had pushed me, and he just thought it was so funny. So at that point, I just walked back over to my locker. After the next class, I went to my locker again, but when I got my other book, I saw the hat. That same stolen hat had been hidden behind my large science book in my locker. I realized then that John must have planted it there. It must have been when the other kid called me over. They probably were in on it together. Now John was trying to plant stolen goods on me. I didn't want to get in trouble or anything, and I was really angry. So I took the hat and went straight to my history teacher's classroom. When I got there, I told him the whole story. I was afraid that he wouldn't believe me, but thankfully he did. He knew that I was a pretty good student, and he knew that John wasn't. He also reported that one of the students had reported to him that she had seen John's Snapchat story. I gave the hat to him, and he returned it to the museum. I remember that John ended up getting suspended for a week for that. After that school year, John dropped out of our school. I'm glad that I didn't have to deal with him anymore. For some background, I'm a female, and this took place when I was in college. When I was a freshman, I remember that for one of my classes we went on a field trip at night. We were going to be looking at the stars, and we're going at 9 p.m. I guess there was this spot a few miles from campus where you could get a really good view of the sky. It was a park, and the entire field trip was completely for extra credit, because obviously the professor didn't expect everybody to be able to make it that late. There were quite a few students in the class, and I cared a lot about my grades, so I decided to go. We met in this one parking lot on campus at about 8:45 p.m. The turnout was a lot more than I expected. There were probably about 25 of us students there, along with the professor. We boarded the bus, and it took us down to the park that was maybe 10 minutes away. Then we got off, and there was this park surrounded by several wooded areas. There was a large open field in the middle, though, and that's where the professor told us to meet. After he talked to us for a few minutes, we all started looking at the stars. We were free to walk around a little, but we also had worksheets to fill out. I started to walk around and do the assignment. About 10 minutes into it, and I was kind of on the edge near the trees. I remember hearing what sounded like a noise coming from just inside the woods. I looked over, and there was this guy creeping along the edge of the wood line. The man was not in our class, I knew that for a fact, and he was just kind of walking just inside the woods and looking at us. I just looked back and away from him and tried to continue. I thought it was kind of strange, but didn't really know what to make of it. A while later, though, I remember looking back to the woods again. The man was just standing there, just barely inside the woods, and facing me. He appeared to be looking right at me, and it was a little bit weird, so I moved away. I went closer to some other people and continued with the assignment. Things went on, but maybe 15 minutes or so after that, I saw the guy yet again. He was kind of standing just inside the grass, no longer in the woods. Once more, he appeared to be looking at me, which sort of creeped me out a little. However, I really wasn't that scared or anything, because I was with all these other people that were in my class. After a while longer, we were done for the day with the field trip. The professor gathered everybody around and then said that we were leaving. So we all walked back to the front of the park and to the parking lot. Then we boarded the bus. Except, as I was in line to get on the bus, I saw up ahead the man from the park who had been in the woods. He was like the second or third person on the bus, and I was wondering why he was getting on. I had been completely sure that he wasn't in the class. I started to second guess myself, thinking maybe the man was in our class, or maybe he did belong there. Perhaps he was in another class with the professor, or maybe he was with the group in some way. Nobody seemed to say anything to him though, and why was he in the woods and staring at me so weird? I went and sat down on a seat pretty close to the front. I looked back and it appeared as though the man had got on a seat in the complete back row. We took the ride back, and when we got to campus we all got off the bus. Then all the students started to disperse. I was a freshman, so I lived in one of the freshman dorms and had walked there. It was about halfway across campus on the other side, so I began to walk back. By now it was like 10 p.m. and there really weren't any other people out. A couple of other students from class walked near me for a while, but they went to one of the other dorm buildings. Then it was just me on the sidewalk walking back. However, I remember that I heard somebody behind me. I assumed it to be somebody else from the class. However, I felt the need to look over my shoulder, and I did. There I saw the same man who had been in the woods and stuff. He was walking sort of far behind me by himself. I had never seen him on campus before, and the man did not look college age. He looked older. Obviously, people of all ages go to college, but this guy just didn't seem like a student. He had no backpack or anything, and I hadn't seen him with the worksheet we had for class. I was like 90% sure that he had just come out of the woods and hopped on our bus. How nobody seemed to notice him was beyond me. As I walked, he remained behind me, and I started to get nervous. I began walking faster. The man seemed to speed up as well. I knew that I just needed to get to my dorm building, because if he didn't live there, he wouldn't be able to enter. You needed a key fob to get in. I walked faster, going about as quick as I could without running. I could see my building, and it was just a ways up. During this time, the man stayed about 50 feet behind me or so. Finally, I reached my building. I quickly used my key to get in and made sure that the door shut behind me. Then I went through the lobby and to the stairs to go up quickly. My room was on the 3rd floor and it had a window looking out. I quickly went to my dorm room and then over to the window. I looked out and saw the man standing by the doors and trying to enter. I watched him start to loudly bang on the front door to the dorm building, which was not opening for him. He eventually stopped, but continued to stand around by the doors for a while. I think he was hoping that somebody else would leave and he could sneak in. Thankfully, nobody did. I looked over again about 10 minutes later and he was still there sitting on a bench. Finally, after a while, I looked and he was gone. I'm pretty sure that that man was up to no good, and I'm really glad that he didn't get in my dorm. This story happened many years ago when I was in high school. I lived near Detroit, Michigan, and one day for my art class we had a field trip. We went to the Cranbrook Art Museum, which is a good destination for field trips around here. The art museum is really nice, and it's a cool area from what I remember. That was the only time that I went there, but when we arrived there was a school and a museum and some other buildings. Around them was some other stuff, and it seemed like a campus almost. There were these winding roads with woods beside them, and a few walking trails as well. So for my art class, we were going with a group of about 20 kids. We got to Cranbrook, and after getting off the bus, we went inside of the museum. It was an all-day field trip, so we were inside for a while. I remember that we got a break kind of towards the end, and we were allowed to go outside a little. I didn't have any really good friends in the class, so I went outside sort of by myself. I was just looking around at what was nearby, and I walked on a path a little ways. I was curious to see where it would go, so I crossed this street, and then the path sort of entered the woods. Nobody else was over there, and it seemed very quiet. I was planning to walk for maybe 5 minutes and then head back. Pretty much, I was just wandering around. However, as I walked through the woods, I heard this sound coming from off the path somewhere. It was a man's voice calling for help. It was weird because it was like he could hear me approaching, but he was off the path and in the woods. I couldn't see him from where I was, but when I came around the corner, I saw this guy emerging from the trees. When I saw him, he said that he needed help. The guy did not appear to work at the museum or be a teacher or anything, and he was much too old to be a student. He was just wearing a camouflage jacket and jeans. He told me to follow him and he started to go into the woods. I didn't want to though, and I asked why. He stopped and seemed annoyed, and he told me to just follow him. He then added that he had hurt his foot. I was confused. What did him hurting his foot have to do with me going into the woods? He told me to follow him again, and I walked a little bit closer. Then, suddenly, the man turned around and started to sprint towards me. My only reaction was to run away. I turned and started sprinting down the path back towards the street to get out of the woods. It wasn't that long of a ways, thankfully, and I was able to make it out. When I did, I heard the man laughing behind me. He did not leave the wooded area of the path, though. After that, I went back inside the building with the rest of my class, and stayed with them for the rest of the field trip. I didn't see the guy again, and I've always wondered who he was. Was he trying to be funny, or could it have been a possible abduction or robbery attempt or something like that? It gives me the creeps to think back on it. This happened a really long time ago. I was in high school, and for some class we took a field trip to go hiking. I really don't remember what class that would have been, or why we took a field trip to go hiking. Maybe some gym class? I really don't know. I just know that I remember the actual field trip really well. In fact, it's probably something that I will never forget. So we went to this park that had a bunch of trails. Some parts passed by flat ground, and other parts went through some wooded areas. There were also ponds and some rocky terrain that the trails went through. I'm pretty sure that there were like 10 miles of trails in that park. So when we got there, my class started out together. People ended up splitting up though. I have no idea how the teacher was planning to find everyone and not lose a student in the massive park, but I know that I was kind of hiking on my own. I started out with a few kids in class that I was kind of friends with. However, at one point, for some reason, I stopped. I don't remember why, but they went one way and I went another. So I started hiking by myself, and I do remember that our teacher gave us these step counters. They were the kind that you just shake them and it counts your steps, and you clip them to your pants or something. So we were going to see at the end who got the most steps. That might have been why I went by myself. Anyways, I walked for a while and I passed by this one interesting spot. There was a little pond to my right and lots of trees around, but not really a woods. As I was walking past, I looked up and noticed something. There was a man sitting up in a tree. It was a really weird sight. It shocked me and I almost jumped back when I saw him. The guy was wearing a hat and sunglasses and looking around. I thought maybe he was bird watching or something and just really into it, so he went up in a tree. And he was honestly pretty hard to see at first. I mean, I'd been walking there for at least 15 seconds before I noticed him. But once you saw him, you saw him. I had to walk under the tree on the path to get past him. So after I did so, I continued. However, moments later, I heard movement in the tree and then heard the man getting down. He literally jumped out from way up in the tree. I glanced behind me and saw the man start to walk after me. That kind of made me nervous. This guy was already seeming a little strange. Why did he suddenly leave the tree after I had passed? I kept walking though, trying to ignore him. However, I soon heard his footsteps, like he was walking behind me. I saw the path turning up ahead, and then there was a spot where you could go left or right. Left was leading back more towards my class, so I took that way. I was really hoping that the man wouldn't do the same, but he did. After that is when I started jogging. This way I would get more steps anyways. So I went faster, and to my horror, it sounded like the guy behind me started jogging as well. I was not expecting that, but it forced me to go even faster. By now, I was running. I went down that path, turned again, and continued running. The good news is at least the man was not gaining on me. Eventually, I stopped hearing him altogether. He must have either not been that fast or in good shape, or just didn't really feel like chasing me that much. Either way, it was a huge relief. I kept going though, and I didn't feel completely safe until I saw other students. Then I was able to hang around them, and I did not want to walk by myself anymore. We walked around for a while longer. Maybe like 30 minutes to an hour later, I randomly saw the guy again. He was now off the trail, almost hiding behind a tree. I don't know how I saw him again, because other people didn't seem to notice. I ignored him though and kept walking. I made sure to stick by other students for the rest of the day. Eventually, we were done with the hiking and we had to meet back up towards the front of the park. Then we left and went back to school. I still think about that sometimes. Why did the guy follow me like that, and why was he even there in a tree? It was very strange. I remember that in 5th grade, my class went on a field trip to this nature park. I don't recall exactly which park it was, but it was probably like 20 minutes from my school. There was a walking path, but it wasn't really that long, and the park was not for hiking. It was more for looking at the waterfall and river that was there. There were different levels of elevation and a lot of overlook places and stuff. So when we got there, I remember that we went to the building and somebody talked to us for a while. It was just my class of roughly about 30 kids and our teacher. We then walked around to the different places on some of the trails. Then after that, we had some time to walk around on our own and look at some spots. There was a kid that I was sort of friends with that I was kind of hanging out with. Well, while we were there wasn't really anybody else in the park other than our class. I did notice a few random people here and there, but not many. So after walking around and stuff and being there for probably an hour, I remember that I went off with my friend. We were just going to different places to see the views. I think we would be leaving to go back to the school in about 30 minutes or so. It was then when we were walking around that I saw this other kid around our age. However, he was not in our class. The kid kind of walked near my friend and I, but didn't say anything. I didn't really know anything about him, but I assumed that he was maybe there with his parents or something. My friend and I eventually walked off, and I remember that the kid sort of followed us. He didn't walk real close, but he sort of trailed us a ways back. We walked around for a good 20 minutes, and every place that we went, the kid seemed to be a little ways behind us. It was kind of odd. We mostly just ignored him though. Eventually, it was time for us to meet back up with the rest of the class. So we went back over, and the teacher took attendance near the bus in the parking lot. Then we all started to get on the bus. It was at this time when I noticed the kid again. He was walking over from the other end of the parking lot. To my surprise, the kid walked right up behind me. I was one of the last kids to get in line on the bus, and my teacher, I think, was talking to another student a ways away. The kid blended right in and got on the bus with me. I was very confused, and I was really close to turning around and asking him who he was, but I didn't. So this kid then got onto the bus and proceeded to sit in the farthest seat in the back. I was shocked, and I'm 100% certain that he was not in my class. He didn't talk to anyone, and just got into his seat on the bus and didn't say anything. I went to a different seat, and we then went back to the school. After arriving back, everybody got off the bus. I purposely looked around to try to find the kid after getting off. When I did, I saw him exit the bus and then walk behind it away from the class. The rest of us had to go inside the school, and once in, the teacher took attendance again. The kid was obviously gone, and I was still trying to figure out why he rode on our bus. I went on with the school day and continued with my classes. Then after school, I got out and I left. This was probably just like an hour after we got back from the field trip. During this time, I would ride another bus home. When I left the school to catch my bus, I saw the kid again. He was standing around by a tree outside the school, but it looked like he was hiding behind it. I honestly don't know what he was doing. We left after that. I never saw him again. To this day, that still puzzles me,